Chapter 253. It seemed to be rising with all its might, but it also seemed to be the last ray of light before the end of its glory. When the unparalleled sword light swept across the entire battlefield, the entire world seemed to have fallen into a deathly silence. The sharp light and shadow swept across the night sky, and all the sounds disappeared completely. The crowd was still fighting, but it was silent. Only Li Tianlan's voice echoed between heaven and earth. It sounded like a sigh, and a murmur, but it had a kind of power that hit the soul directly. It's better to give up. At the junction of the mountains and the sea, the high sky was completely boiling. The night sky within hundreds of meters fluctuated violently like a tsunami as Li Tianlan spoke. The vast sword energy surged. The sword intent fell from the sky, rose from the ground, and gathered from every space in all directions. The air was minced bit by bit and then pushed out by the surging sword intent. The air in the night sky hundreds of meters disappeared completely. The void didn't appear. Only the majestic sword intent and sword energy kept intertwining, as vast as a domain. Li Tianlan's body was no longer shaking. His aura kept rising, from the half-step thundershocking realm to the real thundershocking realm in an instant. Li Tianlan moved his body as if in pain, and his rising aura paused slightly. The next second, the slightly paused aura suddenly began to rise up endlessly, as if it was going to fill the world and break through the clouds. The stabilization phase of the thundershocking realm. The peak of the thundershocking realm. The full closure of the thundershocking realm. The half-step invincible realm. Keep going up. Li Tianlan seemed to have emptied all the sword intent between heaven and earth in an instant. The boundless sword energy suddenly boiled and lit up the whole battlefield. The unique technique of the Wang family of Beihai. Against the way of heaven. Wang Shengshao once taught him this unique technique, but he tore it into powder and threw it away. His against the way of heaven came from Wang Yuetong. Under the invincible realm, this unique technique's unique and almost tragic way of exerting force was enough to upgrade anyone to a big realm. But the higher the realm, the stronger the power, and the greater the price. When Wang Yuetong was in the ice-condensing realm, she could temporarily obtain the combat capability of the fire-flaming realm by using against the way of heaven. Afterward, she just needed to rest. Wang Shengshao could also use against the way of heaven to make himself a superior of the half-step invincible realm in an instant, but he dared not, or was unwilling to pay such a heavy price. But for Li Tianlan at this point, there was nothing he couldn't pay. After taking the immortality potion, he forcibly restored himself to the thundershocking realm. In the thundershocking realm, he directly used the against the way of heaven to forcibly push himself to the height of the half-step invincible realm. But everything didn't stop. When the sword light lit up, the huge vitality accumulated by the immortality potion in his body began to be consumed violently without warning, and another kind of potion began to burst out under the consumption of vitality. It was the Surge potion. Surge, eternal life, defying the heavenly Tao. Faintly discernible, the three seemed to have formed some kind of subtle connection. His aura kept soaring, and countless vitality was consumed. After breaking through the half-step invincible realm, there was almost no pause. He had already broken through the threshold that was enough to make most geniuses despair. The dazzling sword light in the sky became completely stable. Reigning Sword, who was closest to Li Tianlan, could clearly feel the power and emptiness of Li Tianlan's soaring to the highest point. Foundation. The deep and almost perfect foundation that Li Tianlan had attached importance to for countless years completely collapsed in an instant. It was better to give up. His combat capability rose wildly, but his realm plummeted in an instant. He slipped from the peak of the ice-condensing realm to the chi-controlling realm, and finally fell out of the chi-controlling realm and continued to slide. But Li Tianlan had risen to the highest point with the powerful combat capability that he had exchanged for infinite vitality. The highest place. Looking down from this position, the world was quiet. It was quiet. Everything happened too fast, and he couldn't resist or stop it. Reigning Sword, whose face changed dramatically, wanted to pull out the sword and rush to Li Tianlan. Moonlight, whose eyes were frightened, subconsciously wanted to tighten the chain around Qin Weibai's neck. They wanted to open their mouths and make a sound. But the world was quiet. They couldn't move or open their mouths. Li Tianlan glanced at them. His eyes were a little tired, but they exuded a kind of disdain and arrogance that despised everything in the world. White clothes, white hair, and a broken silver sword. The Jiang family of South America should be killed. Li Tianlan said. He raised the sword edge. When I pull out the sword, everyone in the world is a nonentity. When I pull out the sword, everything in the world is under my feet. The sword intent that covered every inch of space began to stir quietly. A breeze blew in the air. The slightly turbulent sword intent became unprecedentedly brilliant. The frightening sword light suddenly exploded in the sky, rushed to the sky thousands of meters away, and turned into a dazzling beam of light that crisscrossed the sky and the earth. Reigning sword of the half-step invincible realm. Moonlight of the half-step invincible realm. The crowd around the Jiang family of South America, the beam of light spread up and down and expanded in an instant. The blazing white light shone into the mountains and the sea. Wherever the light passed, everything turned into nothingness. The low hillside became flat, the nearby seawater evaporated, and the crowd disappeared silently. The world was quiet. The beam of light that reached the sky dissipated. In the night sky, the white clothes and the white skirts snuggled together, calm as ever. Li Tianlan held Qin Weibai tightly in his arms, smelling the delicate fragrance from her body, and his eyes were peaceful. Everything was over. Zhongzhou State's plan, the final battle of Changdao, everything. The moment the sword light lit up, everything was over. Li Tianlan looked into the distance. After the tide rose, the tide fell. The sea was calm. Li Tianlan looked into the distance. After all, he couldn't cross the sea in front of him, couldn't return to Zhongzhou State, to the forest and camp that filled most of his memories. Li Tianlan felt a little regretful, a little guilty, and a little reluctant, but he didn't regret it at all. He wouldn't regret it until he died. He gently stroked Qin Weibai's neck with his palm. The blood stained his fingers, and they were a little wet. Does it hurt? Li Tianlan asked softly. It hurts. Qin Weibai held Li Tianlan's body tightly and whispered. I'm here. Li Tianlan's tone was calm. Qin Weibai quietly hummed and raised her head to look at Li Tianlan. It's okay. She gently stroked Li Tianlan's face with her slender white palm, and her tone was gentle. Li Tianlan smiled, took her hand and said, Watch the starry sky with me. The world was quiet, but the starry sky was bright. He put one hand around Qin Weibai's waist and took a step forward. The sea was getting farther away, and the mountain was getting closer. The roar became loud again, and there was a lot of noise. Qin Weibai frowned slightly. Quiet, Li Tianlan said. His voice echoed between heaven and earth, and the whole battlefield froze for a moment. The battle was still going on, but the sound was completely suppressed. Li Tianlan lifted the broken human emperor in his hand, and the sword edge trembled slightly. A sharp light that pierced through heaven and earth suddenly shone between heaven and earth. The sharp light rushed into a piece of blue lightning, which shattered instantly, and the battle came to an end. The figures of Ice Crystal and Frost Sword of Kunlun City appeared after the lightning. In front of them, Glacier and Tide, and the two Imperial Guards of the half-step invincible realm had disappeared. There was no blood, no wailing. The sword intent swept over, and everything just disappeared and shattered as if it had evaporated. Ice Crystal, who had lost an arm, looked pale. Ice Frost supported him, and their bodies trembled violently. They were one of the top experts of Kunlun City, and also one of the faces of Kunlun City. But in the face of Li Tianlan, they had no confidence to maintain the so-called courage and dignity. Li Tianlan stood there, but he seemed to be standing on the highest position and looking down. That kind of majesty, that kind of strength, was enough to make anyone desperate. Li Tianlan held Qin Weibai in one hand and the sword in the other. The sword and the beauty were everything, and they were the world. Ice Crystal and Ice Frost pay respect to your highness. Ice Crystal and Frost Sword bowed deeply and said in a trembling but respectful tone, Your Highness. This wasn't an honorific for status, it was an honorific for power. and status and power were the same thing in the dark world. No one knew whether Li Tianlan was in the invincible realm or not, but everyone knew that Li Tianlan was absolutely invincible. He was your highness. Li Tianlan did not stop and left with Qin Weibai. Ice Crystal and Frost Sword, the two experts at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm of Kunlun City, bowed deeply to Li Tianlan's back in awe and humility. The sword light lit up again in everyone's sight. The broken silver sword looked short and shabby, but in Li Tianlan's hand, it had a kind of sharpness that could easily pierce the whole world. The huge head of King Bear of the Polar Ground Alliance flew into the sky. His eyes were wide open, and he died with a grievance. Wang Shengxiao, covered in blood, was supported by the enchantress. He looked at Li Tianlan with a complicated expression. No matter how proud he was, how unwilling he was. In the face of the invincible realm, he should also be in awe. Wang Shengxiao slowly bent down and said softly, "Your Highness." In his voice, holy light, the head of the 8 Knights of Knights Templars, was smashed by the sword light. The body of Ben, the vice president of the Heroes Club, fell from the air. Li Tianlan saw Gong Sun Qi. Gong Sun Qi, who was seriously injured, had joined his terracotta army. The terracotta army of Zhongzhou State was called an army, but a quarter of its strength, including Gong Sun Qi himself, was only 6 people. Gong Sun Qi was facing a huge monster wrapped in alloy armor. That was the captain of the Kusanagi army. The sword intent fell in the air with a loud bang. A crack as long as 100 meters appeared on the ground. The huge alloy armor flew into the sky and shot out in the surging sword intent. Before it landed, it had become dust. Li Tianlan wandered in the battlefield with Qin Weibai. One after another, barriers that made everyone in Zhongzhou State feel desperate and powerless disappeared and were broken. The experts decreased one by one. The elites disappeared in droves. The man in white walked through the starry sky with the beautiful woman of Zhongzhou State in his arms. His every move was majestic and magnificent. Everything was actually over. When the sword light in Li Tianlan's hand lit up, it was already destined. One man, one sword. Turning the tide. Just one sword. They were all nonentities. Li Tianlan, have you never thought about the future when you do this? The crow of Fantasy World fled to the distance with all its strength and roared angrily. The sword light chased after the crow. The thunder in the distance flashed for a moment, and then there was no sound. What I regret most now is that there is no future. Looking at the direction where the crow's body disappeared, Li Tianlan whispered to himself. Tianlan, be careful. Evil of the Jiang family of South America is also here. He has the legend of Qin in his hand. Qin Weibai reminded him in Li Tianlan's arms. The legend of Qin. It was one of the 12 murderous weapons and belonged to the Jiang family of South America. It appeared here. The one in Huading of Zhongzhou State was undoubtedly fake. Li Tianlan's eyes flickered and he said yes. Daybreak, who was also in white, appeared in front of Li Tianlan. His eyes were complicated and sad. In front of Li Tianlan, he bowed deeply and said in a trembling voice, "Your Highness." Li Tianlan nodded. "We meet again." Daybreak raised his head with regret and despair on his face. They didn't protect Huawu or Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan had no future. Where was their future? "It's okay," Li Tianlan said. He took a step forward and appeared directly in front of Saint. He let go of Qin Weibai's waist and turned to look at her face. Qin Weibai's eyes were affectionate and persistent. Li Tianlan smiled. His smile was as bright as the white clothes on his body, spotless. "The starry sky is beautiful," he said, "but you are more beautiful. It's going to be okay." Qin Weibai's voice was very soft, but she spoke very firmly. "Junior, do you really think you are invincible?" A thunderous roar reverberated throughout the world and reverberated incessantly. A figure flashed in the distance, and the saber light broke through the air. Tianhai Wuji, the master of Wuji Palace, appeared on the battlefield. Not far from him, Lu Shengtangquan, the master of Jifeng Sword Raining School, also appeared in the sky. 2 invincible realm experts. And an invincible realm killer with a murderous weapon was hiding in the dark. Li Tianlan turned around calmly and said softly, I'm going to kill them. He looked at Qin Weibai and said regretfully, it's a pity that I can't help you vent your anger. The Jiang family of South America is too far. The Jiang family of South America was in South America. It was even farther away from East Island than the sea between East Island and Zhongzhou State. Trust me. Qin Weibai held Li Tianlan's cold hand and looked into his eyes. You won't die. Okay. Li Tianlan laughed. His clear voice sounded in the night sky and kept echoing. After this battle, if I can survive, Li Tianlan, swear to this mountain and sea that I'm not a human being if I don't destroy the Jiang family of South America in this life. A pledge of eternal love was nothing more than this. You. Just with the broken sword in your hand? A voice sounded in the void, misty and vague. It was an evil voice. Li Tianlan slowly lowered his head and looked at the broken human emperor in his hand. After a long time, he said softly, this sword doesn't deserve it. Then I'll use this one. A voice sounded in the distant sea. He swore to the mountain and sea. The mountain and sea responded. Huge waves suddenly rose on the calm sea in the north. Big waves hit the sky. Then I'll use this one. The calm and complicated voice kept echoing in the air, and the whole sea nearby seemed to be surging under the voice. A shocking rainbow suddenly lit up in the distant sky in the north. The rainbow rushed to the sky with manic sword intent, with a long flame tail, like a meteor breaking through the sky. Between heaven and earth, above the sea, a scarlet light that stunned the night sky lit up. The red light passed through the sea for thousands of meters and kept flying in the air. The sharp sword intent pushed back the sky, as if it had traveled through hundreds of years, and finally fell into Li Tianlan's hand. It was a long sword that was scarlet in color. The blade was slightly wide, with a thin line in the middle. It seemed to be a broad-edged sword composed of two swords. The long sword edge stretched out in a straight line from the hideous hilt, with a sharpness that could tear the world apart. Li Tianlan was surrounded by sword intent. The red long sword seemed to have intelligence. It kept trembling in Li Tianlan's hand, as if it was excited and jumping. In an instant, Li Tianlan did not move, but the shocking sword intent suddenly flew up. Li Tianlan closed his eyes and held the sword edge tightly, with tears streaming down his face. He did not expect to see this sword and feel the sword intent when the light of the Li family was about to be completely extinguished. That was the sword intent of the same origin as the 24 moves of sword. Lin Fengting's figure appeared in his sight. He looked at Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan looked at the sword with a complicated expression. This was the sword of Xuanyuantai of Kunlun. It also belonged to the Wang family of Beihai a long time ago. This sword. Chapter 254. Lin Fengting went straight to Changdao as soon as something happened in Huading. The elites of East Island who successfully broke out of Huading took the sea and land route, and so did Lin Fengting. They almost arrived at the battlefield one after the other, and their speed couldn't be slower. But it was still too late. It was too late. Lin Fengting's eyes were filled with disappointment. In his sight, the soaring sword intent brought by Li Tianlan and his sword gradually converged, but the sharpness that pervaded the sky was almost frozen. It was a pride and sharpness that could easily tear everything apart. One man and one sword were the entire world. The rest were just ants. Li Tianlan walked to the sky, step by step. His figure was stable, but it was like the edge of a sword was trembling slightly. At this moment, the scarlet sword and the snow-white figure seemed to merge into one, difficult to distinguish. The battlefield became quiet again. Tianhai Wuji and Lu Sheng Zhangxuan stood together and looked at Lin Fengting solemnly. They didn't know Lin Fengting, but he borrowed the sword from thousands of meters away. This kind of means was at least at the invincible realm. The sword was lent to Li Tianlan. For East Island, Lin Fengting was definitely not a friend. On the battlefield, one was either a friend or an enemy. There's no need for this, Lin Fengting finally spoke. He looked at Li Tianlan. This hermit, who had always been unrestrained and free in the past, sounded a little weak and sad at this moment. At this moment, the sharpness of Li Tianlan's body moved even him. This was the real invincible realm, and it was enough to be listed on the divine list. This year, Li Tianlan was only 19 years old. How dazzling was the light! But this was also the last light of the Li family for hundreds of years. How dim was it? Li Tianlan suddenly remembered a saying. He asked softly, "Senior, do you believe in heaven's will?" The corner of Lin Fengting's mouth trembled. He looked at Li Tianlan and was speechless for a moment. "This is my fate," Li Tianlan said calmly. "If I can live." He paused for a moment, then laughed self-deprecatingly and clenched the heavenly punishment in his hand, which had not appeared for hundreds of years. "Thank you, Senior," he said. "You don't owe the Li family anything, so that's it." Lin Fengting was a little hesitant, but he finally asked, "What else do you want to say?" The 19-year-old Li Tianlan could hardly bear the power of the thunder-shocking realm under normal circumstances, let alone the invincible realm. Li Tianlan could stand now because of the support and consumption of the huge vitality of the immortality potion. Everything was already irreversible. No matter how strong the immortality potion was, it was impossible to support the continuous squandering of the power of the invincible realm. When the vitality in his body was exhausted, his life would naturally come to an end. If he could survive, how could he live? No. Li Tianlan shook his head. In the most glorious and lonely afterglow of his life, he seemed very pure and indifferent. When a person was about to die, how could there be so many afterlife matters? He couldn't bear to part with some people, and he let some people down. He had regrets, guilt, and reluctance. But since he couldn't change anything, he didn't say anything. Lin Fengting was silent. After a long time, he nodded and looked in another direction. His eyes were calm but deep. Somewhere in the distance, Wang Tianzong, the patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai and the number one on the divine list, stood on a dark mountain and looked at Lin Fengting. They looked at each other calmly without any emotion. Behind him, Di Jiang and the entire Heaven's Punishers stood silently, as if they were one. Lin Fengting looked away. He didn't look at Wang Tianzong or Li Tianlan anymore. In Li Tianlan's current state, Wang Tianzong wouldn't and couldn't make a move. In his current situation, even if Li Tianlan drank all the immortality potion of the Wang family of Beihai, it wouldn't change anything. Because to some extent, part of the main reason for Li Tianlan's current irreversible state was that he drank the immortality potion and the bottle of surge potion. Lin Fengting's figure disappeared. He wouldn't make a move because it couldn't change anything. If it couldn't change anything, then it wasn't something he needed to do. "Master, Martial Uncle Lin is angry." Di Jiang watched Lin Fengting's figure disappear and said in a low voice. He was no stranger to Lin Fengting. When Lin Fengting visited Mount Dibing many years ago, he had the idea of taking him as a disciple. At that time, the Jiang family of the Wang family of Beihai was also a little tempted, but in the end, they changed their minds because of Wang Tianzong's words. Instead of going to the Lin clan to guard the gate, it's better to stay in the North Sea and develop the country. From then on, Jiang Hongwei, who was still very young or even young, became the only disciple of Wang Tianzong and became the present Di Jiang. "He's always angry," Wang Tianzong said indifferently. "It has been many years." Di Jiang didn't say anything else. He didn't dare to. Wang Tianzong was still staring at the direction where Lin Fengting disappeared. The Lin clan shunned the world and did not enter the Jianghu. Even if Wang Tianzong had 1,000 words, he could not say them. In fact, he really wanted to tell Lin Fengting that there were some things that he really didn't understand. He also didn't understand the game and implications behind those friendships. Once one entered the Jianghu, even if one was a prodigy and invincible, there were still things one had to do and things one had to do. There was no quick revenge in the Jianghu, only involuntary actions. No matter who it was. But when he saw Lin Fengting disappear in front of Li Tianlan with his own eyes, Wang Tianzong knew that Lin Fengting didn't understand it, but he didn't need to understand it. That was because the Lin clan shunned the world and did not enter the Jianghu. "That's Li Tianlan?" Di Jiang suddenly said. From a long distance, he looked at Li Tianlan's direction with a strange look in his eyes. Wang Tianzong nodded. "What do you think?" "He's very strong." I'm far from his match. Di Jiang shook his head. I originally wanted to find him alone and use our secret channel to catch him and take him to Beihai. Unfortunately, I didn't find him at that time, but I met the military counselor of Samsara. His eyes narrowed slightly and he was a little confused. Wang Tianzong took a deep breath and said calmly, "It's not necessary now." He looked into the distance. Li Tianlan turned around in the distance, holding divine punishment tightly. There were less than 200 people left in Zhongzhou State. Li Tianlan stood in front of everyone in Zhongzhou State and moved forward. He moved forward alone. The whole battlefield was retreating. Raining Sword died, King Bear died, Holy Light died, Ban died, and Crow died. The people in charge of the 5 superpowers had all been wiped out. The elites of the 5 superpowers instinctively began to move toward the team of East Island. This was no longer their war. This was the war of the invincible realm. Even a superior at the peak of the thundershocking realm had to find the right time to intervene in such a battle. The battlefield was retreating. Tianhai Wuji and Lu Shengzangquan looked at each other and moved forward at the same time. "You are no match for me." Li Tianlan's tone was calm and sure, like a verdict. "Arrogant." Tianhai Wuji sneered and said, "You want to challenge the 3 invincible realm experts?" Ants. Li Tianlan raised divine punishment in his hand. 3 ants, come with me. The 3 of them are ants. What about me? A voice rang from afar. The accent of the voice was strange and stiff. But as the voice rang, the whole world suddenly roared. A sharp and crazy killing intent surged from afar, blotting out the sky and covering the earth. A figure approached quickly and became clear. A man with long red hair as red as blood appeared in everyone's sight. The red hair flew in the night, and the killing intent swept over. A tall Western man appeared on the battlefield. He had long red hair, scarlet eyes, and blood-red clothes. He appeared on the edge of the battlefield and walked toward Li Tianlan step by step. It was a very old-fashioned pace, methodical. He walked silently, vaguely giving off a sense of evil and solemn solemnity. A silver cross hung on his chest. The cross shook gently, reflecting the dim light in the night. "Aldec?" Tianhai Wuji frowned slightly. His voice, which seemed to be talking to himself, reverberated in the whole battlefield. The battlefield was boiling, and the huge uproar suddenly formed a huge sound wave. Beside Saint, Qin Weibai narrowed her eyes, which were as cold as frost. Aldec. This was a name that almost everyone in the Dark World was familiar with. He ranked 9th on the divine list in the Dark World, known as the Killing Eye, the Killing Angel of the Vatican. His ranking on the divine list was far lower than Arsis, the Saint War Angel of the Vatican, but he was more famous than Arsis. In most of the conflicts between the Vatican and other superpowers in the Dark World over the years, Aldac's figure could almost be seen. There had long been rumors in the Dark World that if Aldac had not been so murderous, when the Vatican established the Knights Templars, Aldac would probably have been the leader of the Knights Templars instead of the current chaos. Tianhai Wuji ranked 8th on the divine list. Aldac ranked 9th on the divine list. Plus Lu Shengzangquan and Evil, the only killer of the invincible realm in the Dark World. And the murderous weapon, the Legend of Qin. The general trend of Changdao was almost completely formed in an instant, and it pounced on Li Tianlan with threatening gestures. His Majesty needs this person. Aldac smiled and pointed at Li Tianlan. He looked at Tianhai Wuji and said, "I need to take him back." The His Majesty he mentioned was only the Pope. Tianhai Wuji looked at Li Tianlan expressionlessly and didn't say anything. It was useless to say anything at this time. The most important thing was to take down Li Tianlan first. Aldac walked into the battlefield. He appeared behind Li Tianlan, and his figure walked straight past the team of Zhongzhou State. Aldac's figure suddenly stopped, and he turned around to look at the crowd of Zhongzhou State. In the crowd, a pale girl stood there quietly, with clear eyes and a beautiful face. Aldac's eyes narrowed. Dongqing Rushi was also staring at him, without dodging. Illusion. Aldac suddenly opened his mouth and raised his eyebrows. He didn't hide his disgust at all, as if he wanted to slap an ant to death. Aldak suddenly raised his palm and blasted toward Dongqing Rushi. A surging sword light suddenly crossed the sky and the earth. The sword light spread in the air and instantly spread to the sky and the earth. The space seemed to be cut apart, and the sword intent that was sharp enough to break everything went straight forward. Li Tianlan held divine punishment in his hand and took a step forward. The aura that he restrained after entering the invincible realm completely burst out in an instant. He held the sword with one hand, and he was in high spirits. In the whole world, it seemed that he was the only one left, moving forward proudly between heaven and earth, sweeping away everything. That was a kind of invincible and invincible momentum. He was bloodthirsty, calm, and crazy. No one could stand in front of him. All living beings in the mortal world, gods and demons in the sky, disappeared under his sword. The sword light was getting brighter and brighter, and the sword shocked the sky. In the distance, Wang Tianzong, who had been watching the battlefield, suddenly contracted and condensed his eyes. He had seen this sword. Now he finally recognized this sword. The sword that had puzzled him for a long time. He subconsciously turned his head and looked in the direction where Lin Fengting disappeared. He didn't know if Lin Fengting saw the sword. He also didn't know if he would remember something. The sword light in the distance spread out to the limit. Wang Tianzong took a deep breath and whispered to himself, Samsara. Chapter 255. This was an unparalleled sword stroke. To some extent, this sword stroke could be said to have appeared in the dark world for the first time. The scarlet sword edge was shining. The violent sword energy surged up and down in the air. The brilliant sword light of hundreds of meters almost brushed past the people of Zhongzhou State, with the inheritance and sword intent that had lasted for hundreds of years. Aldak's figure flew backward. The sword light swept past him and flew high into the sky. From a distance, it looked like a bright arc that seemed to cut the sky and the earth. The sword light rushed into the sky and cut the void. The dazzling sharpness and the starlight in the sky disappeared at the same time, leaving only darkness. Li Tianlan's figure appeared in front of the people of Zhongzhou State. Aldak's eyes were solemn and full of disgust. He was still staring at the direction where Dongqing Rushi was. The killing intent was rising and falling around him. You want to save her? Aldak looked at Li Tianlan and said in a cold voice. He was not handsome, and could even be said to be ugly. But no one felt that he was ugly when he stood there with a pair of red eyes and blood-red hair. It was a deep and extreme evil, exuding a power that made people feel fear from the bones. I'm going to kill you. Li Tianlan's tone was almost casual and indifferent. Aldak's heart skipped a beat. From Li Tianlan's words, he did not hear the slightest anger or even the killing intent. All he felt was confidence. The kind of confidence that didn't take anyone seriously. After I enter the invincible realm, I will be invincible in the world. Aldak smiled somewhat cruelly. He was ugly. When he smiled, his red eyes narrowed, and his whole face was distorted. He pointed in the direction of Dongqing Rushi. Do you know what she is? Li Tianlan's eyes were cold. Illusion is a sin. She blasphemed against our faith. Aldak's tone was cold and ferocious. She should be burned at the stake. Aldak, the killing angel of the Vatican, was known as the Eye of Killing. No one knew what he saw in his eyes, and no one knew what illusion was. In the crowd of Zhongzhou State, Du Hanyin turned her head and took a deep look at Dongqing Rushi. She didn't know what illusion was, but she was sure that Dongqing Rushi did want to kill Li Tianlan. Even though she didn't admit it, Dongqing Rushi was still confused. I'm not your target? Li Tianlan said coldly. He took a step forward, and the divine punishment sword in his hand trembled slightly. Aldak, Li Tianlan, Zhongzhou State. The three of them were not far from each other, but Li Tianlan was in the middle. For Aldak, it was like the end of the world. It's you. Aldak took a step forward without flinching, a crazy and violent killing intent brewing in his body. But when I bring you back to the church, I don't mind killing that heretic. Perhaps it was because the sentence was too long, or perhaps Aldak's Chinese was poor, he spoke in English. Li Tianlan didn't understand. There was nothing more to say, so he just drew his sword. Aldak's footsteps stopped. Li Tianlan suddenly raised the long sword in his hand. The starry sky was brilliant. The surroundings instantly became silent and dark. Within a radius of dozens of meters, all the light and air were forcibly squeezed out at once. Because the momentum was too fierce, the expelled air instantly turned into a terrible air wave. The air wave rose and impacted, and the entire remaining formation of Zhongzhou State suddenly began to retreat. Li Tianlan's figure was drowned by the absolute silence and darkness of the void. The sword light that had just lit up was completely dim. The void was silent. In the hot midsummer, the coldness advanced and retreated in the void. A cold current appeared in front of Li Tianlan. The endless coldness continued to spread in the void, and the sound of condensation began to be heard around. Aldak's eyes were solemn and bloodthirsty. Li Tianlan's strength was beyond his expectation, so he didn't hold back at the beginning of the fight. Go all out. This was his most powerful domain, a domain that was extremely condensed and shrank to a radius of dozens of meters, and also his most powerful unique skill. Ice-condensed tomb. The ghastly cold current suddenly broke out in the void. The void was frozen bit by bit. The dim sword light completely disappeared in the darkness. Why don't you make a move? Aldak suddenly roared, and his scarlet eyes looked at Tianhai Wuji and Lu Shengzangquan. There was a sudden flash in the distant sky. The saber and the sword were unsheathed in the night sky, with a clang that resounded through the whole battlefield. The saber light and the sword intent instantly approached Aldak's invincible domain. There was a dead silence in the ice-condensed tomb. A gust of wind suddenly appeared in the night sky. The gust of wind blew into the ice-condensed tomb. Tianhai Wuji held the long saber tightly, raised it above his head with both hands, and chopped down fiercely. The brilliant saber light was like a pouring river, surging and rushing to Li Tianlan, who was still carrying divine punishment. For Tianhai Wuji and Lu Shengzangquan, the remaining troops of Zhongzhou State were no longer a threat. Their biggest opponent was Li Tianlan. If they killed him, everything would be over and there would be no more waves. The gust of wind was approaching. The gust of wind was approaching. Aldak smiled cruelly, and he was about to make a move to kill. The completely frozen void of ice-condensed tomb suddenly began to shake, and a large amount of cold current began to break and break. The sword intent suddenly appeared in the area of dozens of meters. The extremely terrifying sword intent appeared in the void. Divine punishment was no longer glowing, but it was still rising little by little. This sword was very light, far less than the weight of the human emperor, but it was as heavy as a mountain in Li Tianlan's hand. Aldak couldn't imagine what kind of sword intent was carried on the blade. The sword intent was completely boiling in the void. Retreat! Aldak suddenly roared, turned around, and left. The long sword in Li Tianlan's hand had been completely raised. 21st Blade Shatter of Land. In the map of God of War, the so-called mountains and rivers were the domains of the invincible realm experts. All the domains. In an instant, ice-condensed tomb was completely torn up by the sharp sword intent. The crazy sword intent filled the whole battlefield, and a large area of the mountain was violently surging under the sword. Dense cracks appeared on the ground one after another. The cracks were deep and ferocious, spreading in all directions. The soaring sword energy passed through the mountain area and entered the sea. The calm sea instantly set off monstrous waves that were dozens of feet high. The waves rose and fell, slamming on the sea like a mountain. The three invincible realm experts rushed to the sky at the moment when the sword intent broke out. The legend of Qin, hiding in the dark, was still silent. Li Tianlan held divine punishment and rushed to the sky. The sword intent rose on the ground and stirred up the sky. After killing Li Tianlan, the last battle would be completely over. For Li Tianlan, this was also the last battle. Break the mountain and overturn the sea. Falling stars and falling moon. The figures of the three invincible realm experts were getting higher and higher. Li Tianlan's figure kept going up with the sword intent. The night covered Changdao, and the white figure that kept rising seemed to be the most dazzling light in the whole dark world. The messy footsteps sounded under the turbulent night sky of the sword energy. Figures appeared on the battlefield one after another, gathering with the people of East Island and the 6 superpowers. The elites of East Island who followed Tianhai Wuji and Lu Shengzangquan to break out of Huading appeared on the battlefield. Not far away, Wang Tianzong and Di Jiang were already close to the battlefield. Kill them. Wang Tianzong looked at the battlefield and said calmly, "Everything will be over." He waved his hand. Di Jiang moved forward with a calm face. Behind him, the whole Heaven Punishment troop took a step forward at the same time. Wang Tianzong looked at them with deep eyes. He didn't look at Di Jiang, the troops of Zhongzhou State, or the elites of East Island. He didn't even look at the battlefield. He stood very high. So as far as his eyes could see, it was all rivers and mountains, the whole world. His rivers and mountains, his whole world. After today, everyone would know that the final winner of the national plot of Zhongzhou State was the Wang family of Beihai, or Zhongzhou State. The sword intent above the sky had gone completely wild. No one could see the situation of the Battle of the Invincible Realm clearly. The elites of East Island and the 5 superpowers started to move forward. They faced Zhongzhou State again. Without that young prodigy, their side was an overwhelming force. "Zhongzhou State, you should be killed." At the front of the crowd, a relatively young superior of the half-step invincible realm walked forward slowly. He looked at the defeated soldiers in front of him, and his smile was cold and indifferent. Everyone in Zhongzhou State stood up and prepared for the battle with a calm face. The last battle. Another figure suddenly appeared in the air. A large area of air was twisting. Vast bolts of lightning fell from the sky like heavenly punishment. The thunderbolts finally condensed into a deep blue light beam from the countless electric lights. The light beam only left the sky among the crowd in the middle of East Island. A surge of power that made people despair instantly exploded in the crowd. There was a roar between heaven and earth. Countless elites of the 5 superpowers and East Island were completely drowned by the thunderbolts. Flesh and blood flew up, and there was a burning smell in the air. The thunderbolts fell. There was a large blank area in the crowd. Di Jiang's figure appeared on the battlefield. He stood under the several invincible realm experts in the air, but he looked down at all the people of East Island and the 5 superpowers. "East Island, you should be killed." He squinted his eyes slightly, looking at the crowd below. "Who are you?" In the crowd, a young man who looked very young stood in the front, with vigilance and fear in his eyes. He was Crown Prince Rend. After Tianhai Wuji and Lu Shengzangquan left at the same time, the Crown Prince of East Island had become the person who could lead the battlefield. Uniform footsteps sounded before Di Jiang opened his mouth. In everyone's sight, hundreds of people, who looked like a whole, moved toward the battlefield step by step from afar. They were getting closer and closer. Their figures were getting clearer and clearer. Even the epaulets on their shoulders were getting clearer and clearer. Finally, someone called out their name in a trembling voice. "That epaulet? It's the Wang family of Beihai. It's the Heaven Punishment Troop. The Heaven Punishment Troop." The silver epaulets reflected the light under the starlight, and the badges of firmament and sea made everyone's hearts sink suddenly. The Heaven Punishment Troop. The ultimate troop of the Wang family of Beihai, 300 people, no more, no less. But these were 300 people whose average strength was close to the peak of the fire-flaming realm. It was the average strength. Who knew how many Thundershocking Realm and Peak Fire-Flaming Realm experts there were in this troop? The most important thing was that they were an organized troop, not 300 people randomly gathered. The instinctive tacit understanding formed after years of cooperation made the enemy feel even more terrible than their realm. The number of people in East Island was still more than that of the Heaven Punishment Troop, but how could the whole be compared with many scattered individuals? "I'm Di Jiang." Di Jiang finally spoke. He smiled and said, "Commander of the Heaven Punishment Unit." He looked over the crowd into the distance and said calmly, "From now on, the Wang family of Beihai will take over the special warfare system of East Island." A figure in white suddenly appeared in Di Jiang's sight. He appeared from afar, but quickly approached. A handsome, almost devilishly cold face appeared in Di Jiang's sight. "We can't agree to this." He looked at Dijiang and said indifferently, "Daybreak, Sunluo Temple Master, asks the Wang family of Beihai to return to Beihai and Heaven Capital." He was not alone. Behind him, there was also a group of white figures. They were organized as one, and there were at least 100 of them. Dijiang's eyes focused, but before he could speak, another voice sounded from another direction. "Li Ming, Hall Master of the Life-Prolonging Temple, asks the Wang family of Beihai to return to Beihai and Heaven Capital." The sound came from the west. Dijiang looked away. Another cold and proud voice rang out from the south. "Phoenix, Master of the Deathless Temple, asks the Wang family of Beihai to return to Beihai and Heaven Capital." Dijiang's expression turned completely solemn. Daybreak, dawn, Phoenix. Limitless, longevity, undying. He had never heard of these code names, nor had he heard of these forces. But the crowd behind them was not fake. Behind the three of them, there was a team of 100 people. And their momentum was no less than that of the Heaven Punishment Unit. They also had epaulets. There was a silver arc embroidered on each of their shoulders, like a divine blade. Heaven Capital? After a moment of silence, he looked at Daybreak, who appeared first, and asked. Among the three superiors of the half-step invincible realm, only Daybreak posed the biggest threat to him. Although Dawn and Phoenix were strong, Dijiang was still sure to win. "This is the place." Daybreak's tone was calm. "This is Changdao." Dijiang sneered and said in a sharp tone. "From now on, this is Heaven Capital." Daybreak's tone was firm and steady. "This is not the place where the Wang family of Beihai should come. In the whole world, there is no place that the Wang family of Beihai shouldn't go." Dijiang looked at Daybreak and said word by word. He clenched his fists tightly and looked at Daybreak. "Who the hell are you?" Chapter 256. Purgatory of Heaven Capital. When it came to his own organization, Daybreak spoke very slowly with obvious awe and arrogance. No one had heard of this organization before, but in an instant everyone carved this organization into their minds. This was the first appearance of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital in the Dark World. But they brought out a super troop that was no less than the Heaven Punishment Troop in terms of aura and number. The seventh day was nearing its end. The battlefield was silent. The elites of the Wang family of Beihai, Zhongzhou State, East Island, and the five superpowers, the Purgatory of Heaven Capital. The four forces stood in different directions, all of them deep in thought. At this moment, everyone could clearly feel the general trend in the Dark World. Night's spirit was annihilated. The Samsara Palace rose. East Island was turned upside down. The five superpowers entered East Island. A bloody battle broke out at the border of Zhongzhou State. Shinichi Miyamoto, an invincible realm expert, died. The young chosen one fought against four invincible realm experts alone. The mysterious but powerful Purgatory of Heaven Capital appeared in the Dark World. The general trend came head-on. The wind surged and the clouds surged. This was probably the most unstoppable trend in the Dark World in recent decades. After today, the entire Dark World would undergo great changes. Great changes were about to occur, and chaos was about to descend. Dijiang's face was solemn. His arm, which was much longer than an ordinary person's, hung down naturally and then clenched. There seemed to be a clap of thunder in the air. Dijiang's eyebrows arched as a towering battle intent erupted from his body and swept through the entire area. He was not as emotional as the others. The world was in chaos. But in the dark and cruel world of darkness, when had there ever been a golden age? The only thing he was thinking about now was that someone had stopped the Wang family of Beihai. The Purgatory of Heaven Capital seemed to want to monopolize the special warfare system of East Island. Zhongzhou State was plotting against East Island, and the battlefield almost involved half of the Dark World. Northern Europe, North America, East Island, and the borders were all fighting. Blood flowed like a river, and bones piled up like a mountain. At the last moment, the Purgatory of Heaven Capital, which had never participated in the battle, wanted to reap the fruits of victory. Who could accept that? Dijiang's fists glowed. Blue lightning flickered in his fists before completely vanishing. He seemed to be bearing something too heavy, and his entire body suddenly sank down. You want East Island? Dejiang looked at Daybreak. His gentle face was still calm, but at this moment, he only gave people the feeling of wildness. A suffocating power that was enough to oppress him surged around him. You think you're worthy? I'm standing here. This is Tiandu. Daybreak looked at Dejiang calmly. You want to fight? As he spoke, the elites of Sanluo Hall, Hall of Immortality, and Hall of Undying moved forward at the same time. They were in different directions. Now that they were walking over, they seemed to be surrounding the Heaven's Punishment Troop. Then let's fight. Dejiang sneered and stepped forward. Boom! A thunderous roar suddenly rang out as the world trembled. Dejiang's figure appeared in front of Daybreak. A large area of air twisted and exploded crazily. The void began to appear indistinctly. The moment the pure black spread quietly, it suddenly turned into lightning that covered the entire sky. It was as if the lightning that could destroy the world did not strike down in patches. Large patches of light and shadow rose and fell continuously, and the battlefield trembled violently under the lightning. The battle of the invincible realm above was faintly discernible in the void. There seemed to be only lightning, loud noises, and daybreak in the whole world. In the lightning, Daybreak's figure was still clear. The lightning destroyed the world. But he seemed to be standing outside the world. Dejiang's figure came to Daybreak. In his sight, the pair of fists that could almost break everything smashed down with the most wild power along with the lightning. Dejiang was still in the half-step invincible realm, but what he showed at this time was no less than the combat capability of an ordinary invincible realm expert. Daybreak's expression was calm and relaxed. In terms of real combat capability, compared with Dejiang, he was indeed a little weaker, but only a little weaker. If they fought to the death, they would die together. What kind of gap was that? In Tiandu, he was not afraid to fight with Dejiang. But it was not necessary. He had a simpler and more direct way. Clenching his fists, he blasted over with endless power. Daybreak's whole body suddenly shook, and the lightning that was about to fall on him completely dissipated in an instant. Under the monstrous power, Daybreak's figure finally blurred for a moment. Then it was over. The lightning began to disappear. The loud noise suddenly dissipated. The battlefield was no longer shaking. Dejiang's figure was still standing in front of Daybreak. His fists blasted out, less than 5 centimeters away from Daybreak. But it was the distance between life and death. A gun appeared in Daybreak's hand. It was a blue gun, emitting endless mystery. The gun was like a short sniper, only over 1 meter long, only a little longer than Dejiang's arm. But the gun gave people the feeling that it was unusually heavy. The thick muzzle, the thick body, and every detail gave people a rough and cold feeling. The gun was silent. Daybreak held the silent gun forward and stabbed it directly into Dejiang's mouth. His face was calm, and his finger was placed on the trigger casually. The silent gun, the silent man. The picture froze completely for a moment. Only the gun in Daybreak's hand was changing. The blue body of the gun absorbed the starlight, and the blue became more and more brilliant, like a gorgeous shadow. There was no doubt that it was a murderous weapon. As long as Daybreak pulled the trigger, the power no less than the full blow of an invincible realm expert would completely burst out from Dejiang's mouth. Life and death were clear. Please ask the Wang family of Beihai to leave Heaven Capital. Daybreak held the murderous weapon and said in a calm tone, You may not be reconciled before, but now your life and death are in my hands. For the combat capability of an invincible realm expert, what else is there for the Wang family of Beihai to be reconciled to? Daybreak opened his mouth wide, and the muzzle was put in. For a moment, he couldn't speak, but his breath suddenly became heavy. Do you dare to shoot? A gentle and calm voice suddenly sounded. Without any warning, Wang Tianzong's figure appeared beside Daybreak. During the whole process, Daybreak didn't even have time to react. Wang Tianzong didn't grab the murderous weapon in Daybreak's hand, but just looked at him quietly. Daybreak knew that he had lost the chance. But he still didn't take back the gun. He turned his head and looked at Wang Tianzong with a strange look and a little relief. It turns out that His Majesty is here. He nodded and said to himself, That's right. Lin Fengting had appeared in East Island from Zhongzhou State. Why didn't Wang Tianzong come? Wang Tianzong shifted his eyes and looked at the murderous weapon in Daybreak's hands strangely. The blue spear seemed to be really spiritual. The blue flame flashed as if it felt threatened. The body of the spear became a little shorter again, but it became heavier. Wang Tianzong looked at it silently. He didn't look at the people from Zhongzhou State, nor did he look at the non-entities from East Island and the 5 superpowers. His appearance here had already explained one thing. Even if Li Tianlan was defeated and killed in the Battle of the Invincible Realm, the special warfare system of East Island would no longer belong to East Island. It turns out that it's in your hands. Wang Tianzong said softly, "Amazing. You flatter me, Your Majesty." Daybreak's tone was flat and cold. "It's the murderous weapon that's amazing, not you." Wang Tianzong shook his head and looked at Daybreak. "You're not strong enough. If I want to kill you, you won't have time to shoot. Just like if the Wang family of Beihai wants to enter East Island, your so-called purgatory of heaven capital can't stop me." His tone was very gentle, but with a kind of spirit of a king descending to the world. "So, why do you want me to quit? This so-called heaven capital? Samsara Palace, Saint, please ask the Wang family of Beihai to quit heaven capital." Samsara Palace, military counselor, please ask the Wang family of Beihai to quit heaven capital. 2 voices sounded almost at the same time. 2 figures appeared not far from Wang Tianzong. A black cloak covered their bodies. They looked at Wang Tianzong quietly, their eyes calm and deep. Samsara Palace. Military counselor, Saint. There was an uproar in the camp of Zhongzhou State. This was the power that first joined hands with them to plot against East Island. But now, at the last moment, the super master of Samsara, who had never appeared on the battlefield, suddenly showed up and made his position clear. They chose to stand on the side of the purgatory of heaven capital. Choosing the Wang family of Beihai meant continuing to cooperate with Zhongzhou State. Choosing the purgatory of heaven capital. This was betrayal. For a moment, everyone felt suffocated. Wang Tianzong looked at military counselor and Saint calmly. "I knew that your thoughts were not simple," he said blandly, "using the whole dark world as a chessboard and tens of thousands of elites as chess pieces. You plan to play with several countries, several superpowers, and several invincible realm experts in the palm of your hand. Such a plan is generous. Who is the mastermind? Qin Weibai? Your palace master? Or the purgatory of heaven capital?" "There is no plan. There is only fulfillment," Saint said in a bland tone. Wang Tianzong's layout was broad enough, but after all, he just got in touch with the plan of Zhongzhou State this time. If the plot against East Island was a plan, then the general trend behind the so-called plan could only be regarded as a half-step chess piece at best. Just a half-step. This was more than generous. "Aren't you afraid that I will kill you?" Wang Tianzong suddenly said, "Just you, even if you and the troops behind you, what can you do? I'm already here. I am here, and thousands of troops and horses, and I will kill them with one sword." Wang Tianzong, who had been quiet and hadn't really made a move for many years, finally showed the extraordinary atmosphere that belonged to the first on the divine list. The invincible realm expert was invincible in the world. "Do you dare to draw your sword?" Another voice suddenly rang out in the void. This voice seemed to come from the depths of the void and echoed in the whole world. No one could find his location. Wang Tianzong couldn't either. Time seemed to go back, to the moment when Wang Tianzong appeared. At that moment, Wang Tianzong asked Daybreak, "Do you dare to shoot?" But this time, the person hiding in the dark didn't show up. Even Wang Tianzong didn't find his location. This voice didn't belong to the master of Samsara Palace. There was no doubt that it should belong to the superior of the invincible realm behind the purgatory of heaven capital. "Who is it?" Wang Tianzong said in a calm tone, "Come out and meet me." "Are you sure you want to see me?" The voice in the void rang out once more. There was no emotion in it, and the words revealed an extremely pure indifference. Before Wang Tianzong spoke, a clear sound of friction had sounded. It was the subtle sound of the weapon being dragged on the ground and rubbing against the ground. But now, This subtle sound was spreading throughout the entire world in a subtle yet ubiquitous manner. The sound of friction gradually approached. The air began to turbulence. The sound of friction turned into a sound of breaking. The sound gradually expanded and suppressed the battlefield on the ground. At the same time, it instantly suppressed the mighty sword intent and the cracking sound of the battle of the invincible realm in the air. Only the sound of breaking friction sounded in the whole world, with the sharpness that had been hidden for many years. Puff! In the camp of the Heaven Punishment Troop, at the moment when the sound of friction gradually approached, several elite soldiers standing on the edge were directly cut into countless pieces by the invisible sharpness that filled the world without moving. The moment the blood mist rose, Wang Tianzong narrowed his eyes with a cold expression. An irregular arc appeared in the void. It looked like the edge of a weapon, and it was completely black. The blade crossed the air, with the sound of friction echoing all over the world, becoming more and more obvious. All the elites of the Sanluo Hall, the Life-Prolonging Hall, and the Athanasia Hall began to bow deeply in one direction, looking pious and awestruck. The blade in the air was completely clear. A figure gradually became clear. It was so clear that people felt that the whole world around them was fake. Everyone seemed to become illusory in an instant. Only Wang Tianzong was still real. A black shadow slowly walked to the front of Wang Tianzong, stepping on the void as if walking on the ground. Everyone finally saw his weapon clearly, and great astonishment rose in the hearts of the crowd. It was a weapon that few people in the dark world used, or even no one used it at all. That was a scythe. A death scythe that was nearly 3 meters long. The sharp and irregular blade was curved, spreading horizontally for nearly 2 meters. He held the scythe, dressed in black, like a real death, powerful and almost irresistible. "What's your name?" Wang Tianzong's tone was calm, without sadness or joy. "Deity." The black shadow holding the death scythe said coldly, like a deity. Wang Tianzong didn't speak. "This is Heaven Capital." Deity's tone was indifferent, with irresistible strength. "Get out." "Your weapon is interesting," Wang Tianzong suddenly said. "Do you want to have a try?" Deity's tone didn't change at all. It was indifference, as if he regarded everything as non-entities. "I never let myself regret," Wang Tianzong said. "Since you want to take East Island, let's bet on a sword stroke." "I have a sword stroke. If you can take it, I will get out of your Heaven Capital. If you can't, you stay here." This world doesn't need deity or the purgatory of Heaven Capital. Under the black cloak, Deity's head seemed to move. He looked at Wang Tianzong and said coldly, "Do it." There was no hesitation, no nonsense, no probing. Wang Tianzong pulled out his long sword with a calm expression. The sword was called Listen to the Sea. The whole mountain area suddenly became dead silent. The sea in the distance suddenly surged up. Wang Tianzong looked at Deity in front of him, his eyes calm and emotionless. He had never seen the death scythe, but his intuition told him that the deity in front of him was somewhat familiar. He didn't want to test anything, and he didn't test anything with his sword. There was only life and death. "Anyone who is my enemy deserves to die." Listen to the Sea slowly came out of the sheath. The bright sword light that could compete with the sun and the moon lit up. He bet on a sword stroke with the whole East Island. This sword stroke. Chapter 257. Facing the most elite force of the entire purgatory of Heaven Capital and the familiar enemy, Wang Tianzong's expression was as calm as water. It could be said that it was the biggest gamble in the dark world in recent decades to bet on the power of the secret service system of a country with a sword. But neither Wang Tianzong nor Deity, who held the death scythe, thought of changing the battlefield. Right here, under the general trend, in front of everyone's eyes. One sword strike determined life and death. One sword strike determined the outcome. If Deity could take this sword strike, the Wang family of Beihai would completely withdraw from East Island and Deity's Heaven Capital. With the strength shown by Deity and the hidden strength of the purgatory of Heaven Capital, even if Tianhai Wuji and Lusheng Sanchuan could defeat Li Tianlan, no one could stop him from rising in East Island. But if Deity couldn't take this sword strike, He himself and the most elite force of the purgatory of heaven capital would vanish in this sword strike, leaving nothing. The most astonishing bet would naturally trigger the battle at the peak of the Dark World. Deity and Sword Emperor. Listen to the sea was unsheathed inch by inch. There was no sound, but the sword light was comparable to the sun and the moon, shooting straight into the sky. The noise of the whole battlefield was completely suppressed in an instant, and the world began to freeze. The air was stirred up and completely broken. There was no void in the battlefield, but the unimaginably sharp and heavy sword intent replaced the air and occupied every inch of space in the whole battlefield. Deity's body was wrapped in a black cloak, so no one could see his expression clearly. They only saw that his hand holding the death scythe gently lifted up. No matter how this posture was interpreted, it could not be regarded as fear of battle. The martial arts of the Wang family of Beihai focused on outbreak. For them, if they fought with all their strength, there was not much difference between one sword strike and 100 sword strikes. The result of this battle was related to the power of the East Island Special Warfare System and the rise and fall of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital. In this case, Wang Tianzong's sword strike was bound to be the strongest of the Wang family of Beihai, similar to the legendary 6 paths of reincarnation. But deity chose to fight. How confident was he? Wang Tianzong's eyes narrowed, and there seemed to be a smile at the corner of his mouth. With a faint smile on his face, listen to the sea's sword fell down calmly. No one could see the mystery of this sword strike. In everyone's eyes, it was casual and even a little weak. The blade cut through the night sky, slowly and quietly. The world had always been quiet. However, the sword light that filled the sky erupted hysterically in the craziest and most extreme way in an instant. It was like the Milky Way pouring down, like the sky collapsing. The stars twinkled, and the moon shone brightly. All the light was instantly suppressed by the sword light. The entire world remained silent. Only the sea-like light was constantly gathering on the blade of the Listen to the Sea sword. Listen to the Sea's blade grew brighter and brighter, but it still slashed down slowly and powerlessly. Deity stood where he was and looked at the blade that was falling slowly. His eyes were dazed and full of emotion. The sword Listen to the Sea was surprisingly slow, but the whole world was completely blocked. There was no way out. Deity had no way out except to fight back. This was an unavoidable strike. The Listen to the Sea sword fell from Wang Tianzong's head to his shoulder. The sword light that seemed to carry the whole world suddenly disappeared. The world was still peaceful, but everywhere was deathly still and dark. It was an indescribable despair. There was no light or sound in the world. The sound of breathing stopped, and the heartbeat seemed to have completely disappeared. Nothing could be seen or heard. Time seemed to be shuttling back and forth in the almost endless darkness and silence. An eternal moment. This was an indescribable despair and fear. Countless people subconsciously took a step forward in horror. Puff! The sword light that filled every inch of heaven and earth suddenly surged. Anyone who tried to make other moves was instantly torn into pieces by the sharp sword intent. It was strong and domineering, almost ignoring the realm. Chi-controlling realm, ice-condensing realm, fire-flaming realm, thunder-shocking realm, and even invincible realm. Under this sword, everyone was a nonentity. The darkness continued, and there was no end. A divine blade suddenly lit up in the darkness that seemed to last until the end of time. That was the blade of the death scythe. Deity raised his arm. The surging sword intent around him was completely shattered in an instant. One after another, dazzling light in the absolute darkness lit up around him. The death scythe was like a real peerless divine blade, and the wild sword intent rose to the sky in an instant. The death scythe rushed into the air. Deity's hands began to make a gesture. The light became more and more dazzling. Eternal light. Eternal darkness. Only those who witnessed the battle with their own eyes could clearly understand that regardless of whether it was darkness or light, they were both harmful to ants. Light and darkness were in a stalemate. Listen to the Sea fell on Wang Tianzong's shoulder. A dark, almost imperceptible giant sword shadow chopped at Deity's death scythe. The giant sword almost occupied the whole battlefield, and all the darkness was like a hole, pressing down with the giant sword. It was as if the whole world was collapsing, being destroyed and dying. Countless complicated and mysterious handprints bloomed in deity's hands. The death scythe flying in the void suddenly began to shake wildly. Different sword intents were madly released in the death scythe. Zhuanyuantai, Mount Shu, Jade Pool, Azura Path, Jifeng Sword Raining School, Sai City, the Vatican, the Jiang family of South America, Fantasy World. 9 different sword intents suddenly flew up with the completion of deity's gesture. The other party didn't seem to be particularly proficient in each sword intent, but with his strong strength, the power of each sword intent was raised to an incredible realm. Unique skill, 9 emptiness and infinity. The 9 sword intents began to merge at the same time. The death scythe suddenly cut through the sky, bringing with it a brilliant light as it pierced through the endless darkness. A large area of darkness was dissipating. The giant sword shadow fell with the darkness and suddenly collided with the death scythe. In silence, darkness and light completely merged and exploded, and the giant sword shadow was torn apart. But at the moment when the darkness retreated, listen to the sea in Wang Tianzong's hand had almost completely fallen. The collapsed darkness surged wildly in the light, and the sword intent rushed to the 9th heaven. After the giant sword was broken, 6 smaller giant swords with stronger sword intent were formed in an instant. 6 different sword intents were mighty in the darkness. They all belonged to the Wang family of Beihai. 6 path sword of the Wang family of Beihai. 6 paths of reincarnation. 6 giant swords fell madly with a large area of darkness. In the intertwining of darkness and light, the whole battlefield kept shaking like an earthquake, but no sound could be heard. The 6 giant swords seemed to carry thousands of worlds with them as they kept falling down. One mountain area after another was flattened. Large areas of forests disappeared completely. The fertile land was turned into scorched earth, and the scorched earth was turned into yellow sand that connected to the beach. The waves on the beach rushed to the sky like crazy. 6 giant swords grew and reincarnated continuously, as if they were tirelessly chopping toward deity in the center. Deity held his death scythe. The death scythe kept waving in the vast sword intent and sword shadow, like a lonely boat in the sea. But beams of light were in a stalemate with the 6 giant swords in the darkness, with the spirit of tearing the world apart. Although they couldn't move forward, they wouldn't retreat. Light flashed in Wang Tianzong's eyes, and the hand holding the sword suddenly clenched. The 6 giant swords in the darkness vibrated at the same time and suddenly chopped down at the same time. The sky fell and the earth cracked. The death scythe, which was more than 3 meters long in deity's hand, suddenly vibrated. His figure seemed to be stiff, but the 6 giant swords that fell at the same time also suddenly trembled. Collection of all things. Emptiness and infinity made 9 different sword intents work at the same time. Collection of all things was to borrow the enemy's power for one's own use. The 6 giant swords were completely broken in an instant. The surging darkness wrapped over, and the great power seemed to be completely added to deity's body. Listen to the sea in Wang Tianzong's hand finally fell completely. The long sword returned to the sheath. A clear clang finally sounded between heaven and earth. The power that had been completely detonated in collection of all things merged again in an instant. 6 paths became one. The sword intent that seemed to have exploded to the extreme rose again in an instant. At the moment when darkness and light alternated wildly, the constantly flashing world blurred everything. Deity seemed to make a seal again. After collection of all things. It was immortality. The darkness spread silently, and no one could see the battlefield clearly anymore. In the strange scene that should have been earth-shaking but silent, darkness and light began to dissipate at the same time. But the sword intent that almost shattered the whole world rose up and filled the sky and the earth. The battlefield was completely quiet. The people on the ground didn't dare to move. The battle of the invincible realm experts in the air also stopped. Several invincible realm experts also didn't dare to move. The black and white disappeared completely. The figures of Sword Emperor and Deity reappeared. Deity's body stood steadily in the void. Wang Tianzong's expression didn't change. The two of them looked at each other from a distance, standing under the bright starry sky again. It was so real. In reality, other people seemed to have become decorations without any breath of life. It's still a sword after all. Wang Tianzong finally spoke. His tone was calm and calm. Not strong. Deity asked back. Very strong. Wang Tianzong said solemnly. So what if it's still a sword? Deity's tone became colder and colder. Wang Tianzong was silent for a while, nodded, and sighed. It makes sense. He looked at Deity in his sight and said calmly, what happened in the past? The people in the past have passed away. Why talk about what happened in the past? Ridiculous. Deity's tone was cold. He raised the death scythe in his hand again and pointed at Wang Tianzong. Take your people and get out. Bang. In the slight sound, a crack appeared on the blade of the death scythe in Deity's hand, and then the whole huge death scythe completely collapsed. The listen to the sea sword in Wang Tianzong's hand was also collapsing. You're just an illusion, also. Before Wang Tianzong finished his words, he was interrupted by Deity indifferently. Aren't you the same? While speaking, the weapons in their hands, their clothes, their bodies, and their limbs were constantly dissipating. There was no blood falling in the air, but the two of them were collapsing little by little in the sight of the crowd. I quit your heaven capital. Wang Tianzong said so before his voice disappeared. Perhaps only a few people present knew how confident and strong Wang Tianzong was when he said to quit. The battlefield was completely quiet. This was perishing together. Everyone was in an uproar. In the entire crowd, Qin Weibai was probably the only one who remained calm and collected. Because from the beginning, she did not look at the battlefield. When Li Tianlan was there, her eyes seemed to always focus on Li Tianlan. The figures of Wang Tianzong and Deity completely disappeared in the night wind, but the sword intent still did not dissipate. The seemingly gentle but actually sharp sword intent filled every inch of space in the sky and on the ground. The moment the sword intent finally broke out, it rushed up to the sky and stopped the extremely fierce battle of the invincible realm. At this moment, no matter Tianhai Wuji, Lusheng Zhangquan, Aldak or Li Tianlan, no one dared to act rashly. Because everyone still had the sword intent of the two masters around them. If they moved one step, they might be seriously injured or doomed eternally. Because the enemy was on the side. That is, Tianhai Wuji stared at the direction where Wang Tianzong and Deity disappeared. His eyes were full of despair, as if he had seen a ghost. Only Li Tianlan remained calm. In his current strange state, from the moment when Wang Tianzong and Deity fought, he already knew that everything was fake. Or in other words, they were all illusions. Such a real Deity and Wang Tianzong were all illusions. From the beginning to the end, neither Deity nor Sword Emperor really appeared on the battlefield. What appeared on the battlefield was one of their sword essences, their strongest sword essences. This sword strike was their sword intent fighting with each other. No matter how powerful an invincible realm master was, it was impossible to completely shape his own appearance with a sword intent. After all, a man was a man, and it was impossible to have any incarnation. But at the level of Wang Tianzong and Deity, their understanding of the sword and the void had reached the peak. What appeared on the battlefield was always sword intent. They just used the reflection formed by the distortion of the void and sword intent to deceive everyone's eyes. It was like a magic trick. But it was a magic trick after the combat capability reached the peak. They couldn't tell the illusion from the reality, not because the magic trick was good, but because they weren't strong enough. That was all. So in the case that most people didn't know, from the beginning to the end, Deity and Wang Tianzong knew each other. They were all illusions. Li Tianlan saw the illusion and also the reality. Vaguely, he seemed to see the commanding heights of the real combat capability. When he could only see two sword intents at a glance, instead of two figures, he really deserved the title of Heavenly Son. He was now invincible realm. But after all, he couldn't be invincible. The remaining sword intent of the enemy could make him not dare to act rashly. How could he have the face to call himself invincible? Li Tianlan laughed. His smile was a little crazy and angry, but the arrogance and humiliation were clearly shown in front of everyone. He had no hope in this life, but he was never really invincible. He saw the real road, but he couldn't walk on it. What was it that he was pursuing? He was in the invincible realm, but he was trapped in the enemy's sword intent and didn't dare to move. Why? Li Tianlan suddenly took a step forward. The remaining sword intent surged wildly in an instant, and his internal organs were severely injured in almost an instant. Li Tianlan's eyes were unprecedentedly cold. Even without the sword intent, he would die today. What did he need to worry about? The sword intent all over the sky strangled madly. The sword intent was completely attracted. Aldak, who felt the restraint instantly lightened, rushed to the seriously injured Li Tianlan without hesitation. Li Tianlan calmly drew his sword. The first blade, Wuji. A faint light began to rise from the divine punishment. Li Tianlan took a second step forward, wrapped in the remaining sword intent all over the sky, and suddenly changed his sword style. Peerless sword. The 22nd blade, break of the sky. In an instant, a dazzling light lit up in the silent midair. The absolute light seemed to be pushed to the real extreme in an instant. The sky was broken under the sword. The void disappeared under the sword. The sword light advanced fiercely, and everything about Li Tianlan was completely out of control. In an instant, the sword light seemed to break through all the shackles. Vaguely, the remaining sword intent in the air was rumbling. The 22nd blade went straight to the peak in an instant. The scarlet long sword arrived in front of Aldak at the moment when Li Tianlan took the second step. Buzz. On the distant sea, a clear sound that had been silent for too long suddenly sounded. As far as the eye could see, there was a bright silver light on the sea. The waves kept surging under the silver light, and the big waves hit the sky. A dazzling silver disk quietly rose above the boundless sea. The bright moon rises on the sea. A full moon, with irresistible power and countless residual shadows, suddenly approached Li Tianlan. When he was seriously injured by the sword intent. When he had no time to care about anything else. The legend of Qin. This murderous weapon, which had been silent in the dark world for too many years, seized the best opportunity and fired without any hesitation. Bang! The bright moon was rising. Another clear and heart-shaking rumble rang out. The bright moon rose above the sea. A faint blue color suddenly appeared in the mountainous area. A faint blue color that made everyone's scalp numb rushed straight to the sea from the mountainous area. The blue line went straight forward. The air was completely twisted and shattered as the blue line moved forward. For a moment, the whole mountainous area seemed to be decomposed into a large area of faint blue. The blue line scattered and merged in the void, tearing everything with shadows and hitting the bright moon in an instant. Shadow Ripper. Above the sea, Evil suddenly let out an incredible roar. Daybreak held the murderous weapon in his hand that had already fired, spat out a mouthful of blood, and fell down on his back. The blue line hit the center of the bright moon. Countless flames flooded the sea in an instant. The moment the huge waves rose, the 22nd blade, whose power had been increased to the extreme, suddenly pierced Aldak's neck. The sharp edge of the sword swept past. The head of Aldak, the killing eye, the killing angel of the Vatican, the 9th on the divine list, flew up with a large amount of blood. The sword intent around Li Tianlan surged wildly, and the sword light of the 22nd blade was still bright. In the sword light and sword energy, Li Tianlan suddenly let out a long roar that could break gold and stone. The sword momentum of the 22nd blade changed again. The 5th blade, flying snow. The midsummer night sky instantly became bone-piercingly cold. Countless sword intent whistled like frost, and then directly became cold. Under the bright moon, among the stars, the night sky began to snow. The snow was like goose feathers, flying and falling. But what made everyone tremble was that the sword intent that turned into flying snow was not Li Tianlan's sword intent. It was the sword intent that had been whistling around him. The sword intent that belonged to deity and Wang Tianzong. He borrowed the enemy's sword intent for his own use. At the most critical moment, the most abrupt turning point. A moment was enough. In the heavy snow, Li Tianlan's roar had not died away, and the sword rose again. The remaining sword intent left by deity and Wang Tianzong completely broke out. The snowflakes poured down, and Tianhai Wuji and Lu Shengzangquan were directly swept away. Li Tianlan's figure was like a shocking rainbow, breaking into the sea in the twinkling of an eye. It was still the 22nd blade. It was still the breaking of the sky. A sword light as long as 1,000 feet suddenly rose above the sea. The sword light shone on the world, breaking everything. The raging flame and the rising waves were completely boiling wherever the sword light passed. Li Tianlan was like a comet shining in the whole dark world, rising against the sky above the sea. The bright sword light suddenly drew a stunning arc in the night. The comet skimmed over the sea, and its landing point was evil, which was hiding in the void. The heavy snow was blowing in the air. It was pure white. This chapter should have been published before 12 o'clock. I got stuck yesterday and didn't finish it. Today I went to another place, and there was a traffic jam on the way, so I published it 20 minutes late. Let's count it as yesterday. Every time I got stuck, I would tell everyone in the reader group about the problems that I couldn't solve. Those who didn't join the group, please join the group. If you really don't want to talk, you can block it. There are not many rules. It's not good to ask for leave in the VIP chapter now. If it's related to the work, basically no one can see it. So I didn't send it. If I ask for leave in the future, I will send it in related to the work. Chapter 258. The Strongest Sword Move. The Last Sword Move. The blazing white sword light crossed the sea, bringing amazing surging waves. The brilliant sword light, which was hundreds of meters long, was spreading with an unstoppable momentum. The sky and the sea seemed to be compressed, and the surging sword light crazily advanced between the sky and the sea. There was no word to describe the magnificence of this sword move. Wherever the sword intent passed, the vast sea rolled up hundreds of meters high waves. The starry sky trembled and surrendered to the sword light. The sea was rising, and the sky was lowering. In a trance, the sky and the sea seemed to be one. The sword light, like a comet, with dazzling sharpness, split the sky and the sea and rushed into the void. It was an irresistible and sublime sword move. The sword light exploded in the void where light should not exist. Snow was falling from the sky, and a large part of the night sky was illuminated as bright as day. Evil, who had been hiding in the dark, had nowhere to hide under the sword light. Li Tianlan saw evil. He saw the anger, consternation, and panic in his eyes. It was like the legend of Qin firing. The timing of this sword move was also subtle. What the murderous weapon blasted out was the power of the weapon itself, but it also consumed a lot of physical strength of the holder. The legend of Qin hadn't fallen yet, and evil's physical strength hadn't been completely replenished. Just when Li Tianlan killed Aldak, the 9th person on the divine list, with one sword move, evil breathed a sigh of relief. Li Tianlan's sword moved across the sea and came directly to him. The world and the void were completely broken into bubbles under the sharpness of the sword light. Li Tianlan's figure became more real than ever. At this moment, evil felt a great sense of danger. Without any hesitation, evil roared with all his strength. The domain of an invincible realm expert spread in the air desperately. The domain was trying its best to shrink. Evil's mouth began to bleed, and the expanding domain turned into a nearly transparent light shield in the blink of an eye. The light shield completely enveloped Evil's body. The flying snow fell after the sword light. Li Tianlan bore most of the remaining sword intent left by Wang Tianzong and God. Tianhai Wuji and Lu Shengzangquan finally got rid of the remaining sword intent. They saw the sword move that seemed to split the sky and sea. They also saw Evil's movement. Tianhai Wuji sighed softly and shook his head subconsciously. At the most crucial moment, Evil was actually defending. He was a killer and the only invincible realm killer in the dark world. At the critical moment of life and death, the assassin was defending. How ridiculous was that? Wang Tianzong was also looking at the sword light in the air. There was no need to think about what would happen to evil, so he kept looking at Li Tianlan. The shining sword light that had completely dispelled the darkness split open the sky and sea, traversing the universe. The whole world, including the sword light, seemed a little fake. What is false is the whole world. Li Tianlan stood outside the world. He broke through again. Wang Tianzong whispered to himself. His tone was not dignified. Instead, he felt very comfortable. He is indeed a genius. What a pity. He retracted his gaze and said in a calm tone. Master, Di Jiang stood beside Wang Tianzong, wanting to say something but stopping on second thought. Don't talk about him. What can a dying man do no matter how strong he is? Wang Tianzong looked far away. In his sight, the heaven punishment troop of the Wang family of Beihai began to go away. They would board at the nearest dock and return to Beihai province. Blood flowed down the corners of Wang Tianzong's mouth. Wang Tianzong wiped it silently, expressionless. Master. Looking at the blood in Wang Tianzong's hand, Di Jiang's expression changed dramatically. It's okay. Wang Tianzong shook his head and took a last look. The light and shadow on the sea were still shining like the morning sun in the night sky. But for him, everything was over. Let's go back. Wang Tianzong turned around and said in a calm tone. But Di Jiang didn't want to give up. It's okay. Wang Tianzong said slowly, what happened in East Island is just a beginning, just a beginning. There's no need to waste too much energy here. What's wrong with giving East Island to them for the time being? Under the night sky, he took another look at the sword light in the sky like the scorching sun, then turned around and never looked back. Deity was also looking at the sword light. The sword light almost flew up against the sea level. Flying snow, huge waves, starry sky, bright moon, after the battle between him and Wang Tianzong, all the magnificence was in this sword. The sword momentum rose in the darkness. Wherever it passed, it was full of light, as if it was eternal. Drops of blood seeped out of Deity's black cloak, flowed down along his clothes, and finally condensed into a puddle in front of him. Deity didn't move, looking at Li Tianlan in the sky. His eyes were unwilling and amazed, but all the emotions eventually turned into indifference, with undisguised killing intent. In the void, the woman in white, who had never shown up and seemed to be a bystander, was also looking at the sword light. The sword light was as bright as day in the deep night sky, and the boundless sword intent was completely boiling. But in her eyes, it was so dim. The red crystal clear mutual forgetfulness swayed gently around her waist. In the silence, she seemed to take a step forward. This sword move was watched by all. East Island, Zhongzhou State, the 5 superpowers, all the elites were looking up silently. The sword intent was too proud and dazzling, so strong that it filled their sight and perception, and it couldn't be ignored. The Battle of Changdao was over. This was the last sword move. Maybe it had nothing to do with the final result, but it was related to the current general trend. In the camp of Sai City, tribulation opened his eyes, and his breath was weak. Dongcheng Rushi's eyes sparkled. Confusion and clarity kept alternating, and she looked more and more beautiful. Yu Qingyan held Ning Qianqing beside her with her tender and white hands. She looked at the sword light in the sky, and occasionally at Phoenix, the master of the life-prolonging temple in red. The Yin and Yang sword master of Mount Shu, Han Chongyang, and the great void sword master, Li Beidian frowned. They could feel the sharp sword will in the air that seemed to be able to shatter the sky, but they could also feel the emptiness and weakness behind the sword will. Second's senior brother, Han Chongyang smiled bitterly and murmured to himself. The Wang family of Beihai was silent. Kunlun City was silent. East Island, the 5 superpowers, Tianhai Wuji, Lusheng Zhangquan, and everyone else was silent. In the weird silence, Qin Weibai's eyes were still ethereal and dreamy. She looked at Li Tianlan in the sky and stepped forward. She was alone. Until then, people found that Saint, who had been guarding her, had disappeared. But no one dared to attack her. Wherever Qin Weibai passed, the crowd automatically made way for her, whether it was Zhongzhou State or East Island. Because the sword light in the sky was still bright. She was still under the light of the heavenly sun of the present age. In front of evil, the invincible domain that had completely turned into the void shrank completely. The light shield expanded around him, light and heavy. This was a move without any killing intent. At this moment, all of evil's unique skills became the most thorough defense. As long as he could survive this sword strike. He thought silently, and his eyes became ferocious again. Divine punishment stabbed the light shield in front of evil with the sky-piercing sword light. A spot on the light shield suddenly caved in crazily, but it didn't break. Divine punishment paused slightly. Evil felt his blood run cold in an instant. In his sight, Li Tianlan's eyes were very calm. Evil saw determination in his eyes, determination that he didn't care about being smashed to pieces and being doomed eternally. Evil suddenly thought of Li Tianlan's ridiculous oath. He swore to mountain and sea. At this time, he completely understood that Li Tianlan came from Zhongzhou State. He saved the remaining team of Zhongzhou State alone and turned the tide. But the one he wanted to kill most was him and the Jiang family of South America. The sword light suddenly lit up. Li Tianlan's long sword stabbed straight in. All the rebound power on the light shield poured out wildly. Li Tianlan didn't care. It seemed that even if the world was broken, he had to stab with this sword. Boom! A deafening loud noise suddenly sounded on the sea. The huge waves that soared to the sky were completely shattered under the sharp and determined sword intent. The mountain-like waves turned into a large expanse of water light, as if the whole sea had completely exploded in the air. The sword light and the moonlight fell at the same time. The water in the void surged, the sparkling waves were dissipating, and finally became snowflakes. The heavy snow was flying. The snowflakes fell on the mountains, on the sea, and into the sword light. The sword light and the flying snow drifted away at the same time. The light shield around evil collapsed completely. The scarlet divine punishment sword edge directly stabbed into his mouth, pierced the back of his head, and came out from the other side of his head. The sword light, the void, and the huge waves all disappeared. Only the flying snow was still falling. Li Tianlan smashed evil's body with one sword. While countless pieces of flesh and bones were scattered in the sea, he reached out and grabbed the legend of Qin, which was famous in the dark world. The body of the legend of Qin trembled violently in his hand, but it didn't resist at all. A cyan bronze mirror hung at the end of the handle, constantly swaying in the air. He held a murderous weapon and a famous sword. Li Tianlan's aura was still strong, but after doing all this, he seemed to become completely weak in an instant. Tianhai Wuji and Lu Sheng Zhangquan stood in the distance, motionless. The snowflakes fell, and the midsummer night became cold. A large area of the battlefield was already a vast expanse of white. Li Tianlan fell silent. Everyone also fell silent. Only the cold wind whistled between heaven and earth. Only the ice and snow covered the mountains and fields. The snow was getting heavier and heavier, covering the whole mountain area. The night became no longer pure. Under the starlight, Li Tianlan crossed the sea in one step and appeared in the center of the battlefield. In the last afterglow of his life, he was a little tired, but he didn't despair. He stood high in the sky, pulled out his sword and looked around. In his sight, the corpses piled up like a mountain, and the blood flowed like a river. In the silence, Li Tianlan's voice rang out on the battlefield, clear like thunder, reverberating between heaven and earth, and the mountains began to roar under his voice. "Who dares to fight with me?" There was silence. No one spoke. Including Tianhai Wuji and Lu Sheng Zhangquan, two experts of the invincible realm. Li Tianlan laughed wildly and brilliantly. "Who is qualified to fight with me?" He stood in the void, and the snowflakes shuttled and fell around him. The fierce killing sword intent swept through the sky and the earth. His eyes began to become crazy, and his whole person seemed to have been connected with heaven and earth, extremely terrible. If I moved, the mountains and rivers would collapse. If I died, the sky and earth would collapse. Supreme and supreme. Lu Sheng Zhangquan and Tianhai Wuji were expressionless. The snow was still falling. Cold snow, cold people. Qin Weibai looked up quietly, almost devoutly at Li Tianlan in the air. She was motionless and looked a little obedient. Everything seemed to be going backward. The sharp sword intent passed through the quiet years, and a vast expanse of whiteness, like the snow, overlapped with this place, and heaven and earth were fading. In a trance, Qin Weibai seemed to see the same person, the same sword. But after all, there were too many people and things missing in this scene. There was no heavenly Emperor Huawu in her memory, no murderous weapon that was famous in the dark world, and no resolute black clothes that held the sword. She saw Li Tianlan raise the blade in his hand, and he smiled brightly. "I have a sword and I'm willing to go with you." Li Tianlan looked at the crowd of East Island, at the two experts of the invincible realm, and said calmly. The blade stretched in the air. The snowflakes dissipated. The sword light bloomed. There was only one sword between heaven and earth. The space around them fluctuated slightly without anyone noticing. A large expanse of starlight completely collapsed in an instant. Li Tianlan raised the blade in his hand, but the crazy and resolute sword intent suddenly appeared behind him. In the void that no one noticed, the sword intent bloomed. There seemed to be a waterfall that was completely condensed by sword intent in the air. The sword intent flew down, moving forward with indomitable will. The frenzied and extremely sharp sword intent instantly condensed into a single point. Li Tianlan turned around. A white dress abruptly appeared in Li Tianlan's sight. The combination of human and sword. The cold wind blew through the white dress. Her skirt corner, her veil, and the red dagger hanging on her waist kept dancing in the night wind, but her eyes were still fixed like ice and snow. Li Tianlan recognized this sword stroke. This sword stroke was the 11th blade. The 11th blade, alluring. Seemingly confused, Li Tianlan turned his head slightly. The blade of divine punishment was raised. At the same time, in the mountain area far away from this sword stroke, deity in black stared at the sword light in the air, staring at the white shadow. The white shadow moved forward in the cold wind, like a meteor, with a brilliance that stunned an era. Deity's body began to tremble. He held the huge death scythe in his hand tightly. His eyes were a little cold, a little self-deprecating, a little sad, and a little resentful. At the moment when the sword light lit up, deity, who dared to fight with Wang Tianzong, seemed to be laughing, but also seemed to be sighing helplessly. All the killing intent and indifference on his body disappeared completely, and his body began to stagger. But his hands were holding the weapon in his hand tightly. Deity staggered and took a step forward. His whole body directly rushed into the sky. The sword light traveled through the air. The extremely contracted sword light was bright and dazzling, with indescribable desolation and beauty. The blade in Li Tianlan's hand stopped. Everything seemed to be very short, but also seemed to be very long. Like an instant, like an eternity. Suddenly, the sword energy dissipated, and the sword intent dissipated. The white dress appeared in front of Li Tianlan. The long sword also appeared in front of Li Tianlan. The cold sword blade directly pierced Li Tianlan's heart. The surging sword intent broke out in his body and then came out. Countless blood mists burst out all over his body. Li Tianlan stood motionless, looking at the pair of cold starry eyes in front of him, and smiled slightly. From the moment he saw Qin Weibai, he knew that he would die today. But when death really came, he really experienced that feeling. Cold, desperate, like the feeling of the sword blade. Li Tianlan's smile gradually widened, and he whispered, "It hurts. Why don't you fight back?" She was dressed in white and her tone was cold. Her sword was shaking, and she seemed to be unable to control her emotions. "She will die." Li Tianlan smiled softly, but his eyes swept over the white dress in front of him and looked behind her. Behind him, Qin Weibai was standing there, watching everything that happened with gloomy eyes. The sword light lit up behind Li Tianlan. Qin Weibai was standing between Li Tianlan and the woman in white. In this position, if Li Tianlan fought back, the ultimate sword intent was enough to erase everything, including the elite team of Zhongzhou State, including Qin Weibai. Li Tianlan stopped the sword and used his body to bear all the sword intent of the opponent. The woman in white did not look back. She knew who Li Tianlan was looking at. Her arms kept shaking, but her tone was still calm. "I'm sorry. In this life, after all," she said sorry to the second person for the second time. Li Tianlan continued to smile. He did not look at the person in front of him, did not look at the sword in front of him, just looked at Qin Weibai, who was gradually blurring in his sight. People were dying, and their sight gradually began to become dark. "I'm sorry." The woman in white continued to speak. Li Tianlan tried to look. The two of them were very close, but they seemed to be far apart. "I want to go home." Li Tianlan looked at Qin Weibai and whispered to himself. The distance between them became the horizon, and his sight disappeared completely. There was only darkness in front of Li Tianlan, like a dead void. "I'm sorry." The voice of the woman in white continued to ring. Li Tianlan's eyes had lost focus. He tried to smile, kept the corners of his mouth stiffly, and looked in the direction of Qin Weibai. "I really want to see her again." "I'm sorry." The long sword in her slender hand loosened. Li Tianlan's body fell down powerlessly. The ground was white, full of wind and snow. Saint's figure suddenly appeared in the air. He caught Li Tianlan and sent him to Qin Weibai's side. Qin Weibai took him. She looked calm, but her hands were a little weak. The moment she caught Li Tianlan, their bodies fell directly in the snow. One figure after another appeared around Qin Weibai. The 12 super masters of Samsara Palace all appeared on the battlefield. With Saint as the leader, the 12 of them stood in a strange formation. However, the aura they emitted instantly merged into one, like a magnificent sword formation. Qin Weibai held Li Tianlan, who was covered in blood, tightly. For a moment, she seemed to be unable to speak at all. The delicate fragrance drilled into Li Tianlan's nostrils. Li Tianlan's face had turned blue and gray. He leaned against Qin Weibai's arms, and the stiff corners of his mouth moved hard. He trembled and said, "It hurts." In fact, it was not pain. It was because he was reluctant to leave. The cruelest emotion when a person was about to die was reluctance to leave. Qin Weibai bit her lip hard, lowered her head, and put her face on Li Tianlan's head, as if she wanted to give him some warmth. She bit her lips so hard that it bled, but she kept repeating it. "It's okay, it's okay." Li Tianlan smiled weakly. He seemed to want to reach out and touch Qin Weibai, but his raised hand was completely stiff, and finally fell to the ground without the slightest strength. He lay in Qin Weibai's arms, and there was no more sound. Everyone in Zhongzhou State subconsciously wanted to gather around, including the Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City. "Let them go." Qin Weibai held Li Tianlan tightly and screamed all of a sudden. Everyone's footsteps suddenly stopped. Almost at the same second as Li Tianlan fell. Zhongzhou State, West Lake, Mount Qingyan. The fairyland, which had been crazily discussed by the people of Zhongzhou State on the internet recently, suddenly exploded in the middle of the night. Great Master Wei sat in the flowers and plants in front of Qingyun Temple, which almost submerged the temple gate. He held a fate roulette in his arms. On the roulette, the pointer representing the destiny of heaven had stopped trembling, and it steadily stayed on the word death. At a certain moment, the pointer on the roulette trembled slightly. The white mist that enveloped the entire Qingyun Temple began to spin wildly in an instant. The white mist fluctuated and kept spinning over the entire Mount Qingyun. The wind blew through the mountains. The flowers, plants, and trees rustled. The cold wind passed all the way. In an instant, all the flowers, plants, and trees in the entire Qingyun Temple withered in an instant. The entire Qingyun Temple was completely quiet, as if the world was about to die. Great Master Wei, who sat cross-legged in front of the temple gate like a Buddha statue, slowly opened his eyes. He looked at the withered and fallen trees and flowers in his sight and breathed a sigh of relief. The pointer of the roulette in his hand no longer trembled, and it calmly stayed on the word, death. Great Master Wei sighed softly. He reached out his hand. A gust of wind suddenly blew through the air. The gust of wind blew his monk robe. White hair had already grown out of his bald head, reaching his waist. It suddenly exploded in the gust of wind and flew wildly. Great Master Wu's palms stayed on the pointer. Little by little, it seemed that he had exhausted all his strength. His palm pushed the pointer back to the center of the word life on the roulette. The white mist all over the sky fell desperately. Great Master Wu looked up at the sky. As the wind blew, his face was full of wrinkles, and he seemed to be struggling to open his eyes. Blood flowed down from between his eyebrows. It dripped to the ground. Great Master Wu opened his mouth slowly. His voice was weak, as if he was praising himself, but also as if he was telling a fact. He said softly, "I've done immeasurable good in my life." The white mist all over the sky trembled at the same time, and the white mist that had pervaded Mount Qingyun for many days disappeared completely in an instant. The night sky was clear, and the stars were bright. Great Master Wu's blood fell into the soil on the ground. Flowers bloomed in the soil. The color was soft, and there was only one. Chang'e. Everything seemed to have come to an end. In the air, the woman in white, who seemed to have calmed down, took a deep look at Qin Weibai and Li Tianlun, who were hugging each other. She turned around silently, as if she wanted to leave. "Where do you want to go?" A gentle voice that made people feel as if they were bathing in the spring breeze rang in her ears. Deity's figure appeared in front of the woman in white, and his eyes were soft. But the woman in white saw extreme cruelty and mockery in his soft eyes. This was a look she was familiar with. She just saw the fight between Deity and Wang Tianzong, but she didn't see his eyes. The woman in white's body suddenly shook violently. She trembled violently in the air and stared at Deity in front of her. Her eyes fluctuated violently, with surprise and panic. "Do you know me?" Deity chuckled and said, "How do you know me?" He reached out and pointed to his heart. Under the white veil, the woman in white's face suddenly turned pale, and even her eyes were full of despair. She naturally knew what this action meant. Many years ago, just like today, in the heavy snow, she also pierced the heart of the man in front of her with a sword. It was the exact same sword. The woman in white's lips kept trembling. She looked at Deity in front of her with guilt and panic in her eyes. Do you deserve to talk to me?" Deity suddenly spoke in a soft and cold tone. "Who do you think you are? Do you deserve to talk to me? Just listen to what I say." "No." The woman in white's body shook and seemed to fall from the air. Crystal clear tears fell from her eyes and fell on the white snow on the ground. Her voice was hoarse, desperate, and empty. "Please don't do this." "Do what?" Deity was still smiling. "It's not me. It's you. Don't do this to me." The woman in white's body kept trembling. She began to step back like a delicate and weak flower. "You deserve this, don't you? It's not too much to treat a person like you, right?" Deity laughed and said, "Hypocritical, insidious, and slutty. Should I call you a vicious woman? Or should I call you a whore?" No. The woman in white finally cried. Her voice was intermittent, without any coherence. "I once thought about it. I really thought about it. I wanted to stay with you for the rest of my life." "Stay with you?" Deity laughed out loud. "For you and me, the cruelest thing in the world is to stay with you. You don't deserve this word." His voice was low. "You used to be very good to me, and I was moved. But the more I was moved and the more I doted on you, the more I hated you when I learned the truth." He looked at the woman in white's eyes. "You can't make up for anything. No matter how good you are to me, you can't make up for anything. Only you will die, so—" Deity raised the death scythe in his hand. "Go to hell, bitch." In the sky, the woman in white's figure suddenly shook. On the ground, Qin Weibai, who was holding Li Tianlun, also shook. In the sky and on the ground, the two women in white had despair in their eyes. The death scythe was raised. The sharp blade appeared in front of the woman in white in an instant. The woman in white did not dodge. She just looked at the man in front of her quietly, with tears streaming down her face. The death scythe stopped in front of the woman. Deity tilted his head and smiled with some playfulness. "You seem to be in pain?" He held the death scythe firmly in his hand. "Well, it seems good to let you suffer for a while. The huge and cold blade gently patted the woman's face, but did not remove her veil. He was tired of seeing this face. Even if it was beautiful, it was still vicious. "Get out," he said. "Live a little longer. When I'm tired of playing, I'll take your cheap life. Get out." The woman in white laughed self-mockingly and said softly, "Kill me. Dirty hands." Deity's tone was full of disgust. The woman in white seemed to calm down. She looked at Deity in front of her and whispered, "I told you a long time ago that I'm all yours. I killed you once. When you need me to die, come to me. I'll solve it myself." She turned around and said softly, "As long as you're happy." Deity did not say anything. The woman in white turned around and left. Her figure passed through the sword in tent left by Deity and appeared in front of everyone again. Although the conversation between the two of them was very long, there were only a few people who could hear and see it. Very few. Deity's figure landed on the ground. The woman in white disappeared in the distance. Everything came to an end. The fierce man who suddenly appeared but could take Wang Tianzong's 6 paths of reincarnation slowly walked to Li Tianlan and Qin Weibai. The 12 super masters were motionless. What a fool! Deity looked at Li Tianlan, who fell into Li Tianlan's arms without a sound. There were obvious emotional fluctuations in his voice. He seemed to be laughing and crying at the same time. He looked at Li Tianlan as if he was looking at himself a long time ago. Qin Weibai, whose eyes were desperate and numb, raised her head stiffly. She looked at Deity. Her ethereal and dreamy eyes finally had some spirit. He looked at her and stared at her. "You can save him," Qin Weibai said word by word. Deity did not speak. Qin Weibai picked up divine punishment in Li Tianlan's hand with trembling hands. The scarlet sword blade was raised in her hand. She pointed at Deity. Her posture of holding the sword was a little jerky, but her posture was extremely firm. "Save him. What are you willing to pay for him?" Deity's tone was calm. "Everything." Qin Weibai did not hesitate. Everything. This word was too heavy, especially for a person of high status like Qin Weibai. How could she say it lightly? Deity's eyes gradually softened. "I will do it," he said, "with everything you have." "What do you want?" Qin Weibai's tone was cold. Although she had given a lot before, the initiative was in the hands of Deity. It was as if she had expected all this before. But now Li Tianlan was in her arms without breathing or heartbeat, which was also unbearable for her. "I don't want anything. We just need to continue to cooperate." Deity waved his hand. The legend of Qin in Li Tianlan's hands suddenly trembled. The cyan bronze mirror hanging on the handle of the spear directly left the body of the spear and flew into Deity's hand. Yada no Kagami. Deity looked at the mirror in front of him with calm eyes. One of the national divine weapons of East Island can appear in the hands of evil. He turned to look at the elite team of East Island. It seems that there is a deal between the Jiang family of South America and East Island. Deity knocked on the cyan bronze mirror casually and said calmly, "This thing is very useful. I'll leave everything to you." Qin Weibai looked at Deity, and her tone was a little pleading. "I don't have absolute confidence," Deity said. "At most, I have 70% confidence. Give him to me. It's 80%. Qin Weibai subconsciously held Li Tianlan in her arms. "Saint will go with you." Deity looked at Saint with some surprise. Saint was also looking at him calmly. "Is it worth it?" Deity asked with some playfulness. Saint's answer was simple and domineering. "I do." Once the identity of some people was clear, they were old acquaintances. Deity laughed and waved his hand. Dawn, the master of the Athanasia temple, appeared in front of everyone. He was no longer in white, but in black, exactly the same as the members of the Athanasia temple behind him. "How is Daybreak?" Deity asked softly. "Fortunately, he's just temporarily unconscious. It's not a big problem," Dawn said in a respectful tone. Deity nodded and looked at Li Tianlan with a flash of killing intent in his eyes. Then he shook his head. "Take him back. This person needs to be saved." Dawn answered and was about to step forward. Qin Weibai held Li Tianlan tightly and looked down at him quietly. Li Tianlan closed his eyes, so he couldn't hear or see. Qin Weibai looked at his face deeply as if she wanted to carve him into her soul. Her palms were trembling. She held Li Tianlan and got closer and closer. "Boss Qin." Dawn stood in front of Qin Weibai and shrugged helplessly. Qin Weibai silently handed Li Tianlan to Dawn. The process was very short, but every second was as long as thousands of years. She closed her eyes and her hands became empty. It was not until a long time after Dawn took Li Tianlan away that Qin Weibai opened her eyes and trembled with breath. The battlefield was still the same. Everyone was clearly standing in different places. The only difference was that there was no Li Tianlan on the battlefield. But for Qin Weibai, the only difference was the biggest difference. She slowly stood up and left the battlefield step by step. "Don't you go and have a look?" Deity's voice sounded behind her. Qin Weibai didn't stop and kept moving forward. At this moment, Qin Weibai was still beautiful, but she seemed to have lost all her soul. Her figure became numb and powerless. Everything ended here. Zhongzhou State. Li Tianlan. That place, that man, carried too much of her sorrow and joy. She had long been overwhelmed. So she didn't look back, and she would never set foot in Zhongzhou State for the rest of her life. Qin Weibai's eyes were empty and silent. It was a kind of despair. Her soul, her feelings, her home. She was buried under the starlight tonight. Blood flowed down the corners of her mouth and dyed her white clothes red bit by bit. Chapter 259. Deity quietly watched Qin Weibai's figure disappear, but he didn't see her fall down. Except for saint and military counselor, the super masters of samsara left one after another. The battle stopped, and the sea became calm again. Bright starlight sprinkled down. On the battlefield that had completely ended, everything was calm like a silent picture. God stood where he was, motionless. The others didn't dare to move either. The elites of Zhongzhou State who had suffered heavy losses stood in the center of the battlefield. The remaining team of less than 200 people was almost all seriously injured. Gong Sun Qi, the Azure Dragon of Zhongzhou State, stood in front of the crowd with Tribulation's help. He looked at Deity, who seemed to be thinking about something, with a calm expression. Tribulation's expression was also calm. No one took the initiative to attack Zhongzhou State. The elites of East Island and even the elites of the 5 superpowers had separated quietly at some point. All the elites of the Jiang family of South America had been wiped out. The Heroes Club, the Polar Ground Alliance, the Fantasy World and Knights Templars, who had lost their leaders, still had a vague connection with each other, but their vigilance toward each other was greater than cooperation. Tianhai Wuji and Lu Shengzangquan stood in front of the elites of East Island and didn't say anything. The battle was meaningless. In the final battle of Changdao, all the superpowers sent out their elites frequently, and the flames of war spread to the entire dark world. No matter which side, they all spent a lot of effort, but they all suffered heavy losses, and the final winner didn't belong to any side. The Purgatory of Heaven Capital, which suddenly appeared, broke the plan of all superpowers and became the biggest beneficiary of this final battle. Before the Purgatory of Heaven Capital, or Deity, showed a clear attitude, any action of any other superpower was meaningless. Deity had no attitude. He just stood there quietly in the starry sky, as if he had fallen asleep. Time passed slowly. From night to late night. The bloody smell in the battlefield was getting heavier and heavier, and the atmosphere was constantly depressed in the silence. Everyone's body seemed to be numb from standing, but the anxiety in their hearts kept rising and falling. Then, a phone suddenly rang, breaking the extreme silence on the battlefield. At the front of the East Island camp, Crown Prince Renhe of the royal family answered the phone with a serious look. After saying something respectfully, he started to move forward. Countless people focused their attention on Crown Prince Renhe. Crown Prince Renhe walked toward Deity. His back was straight, but the closer he got to Deity, the more bent his back became. The distance between them shortened. Crown Prince Renhe's body finally bent into a humble posture. "Ren, he greets your highness." He walked in front of God and bowed deeply. "Crown Prince, you're too polite." Deity glanced at him and said in a calm tone, "Father has asked me to invite your highness for breakfast. The helicopter is already on its way. Imperial Father will be waiting for you in the palace." Crown Prince Renha's tone became even more respectful. He did not deliberately conceal his voice, so everyone who should have heard it heard it. This was not a surprising choice. East Island suffered a heavy loss in this battle. At least 10 superiors of the half-step invincible realm died in Li Tianlan's hands. Shinichi Miyamoto, the palace master of Liuhua Palace, died. A large number of superiors at the peak of the Thundershocking realm disappeared, and countless elites of the Fire-Flaming realm were lost. After this battle, the strength of the special warfare system of East Island was weakened by half. More importantly, even the other half of their strength was basically controlled by God. Tianhai Wuji, Lusheng Zhangquan, and a large number of elites of the Divine Wind Force were on the battlefield right now. Deity was also here. Even if he could not kill everyone here, it was easy for him to inflict heavy damage on the remaining strength of East Island. East Island would understand the situation in front of them. So Deity's silence before was equivalent to forcing East Island to make a clear statement. Crown Prince Renha's open invitation was also equal to East Island's attitude to the whole Dark World. Whether it was forced or sincerely welcomed, after the Battle of Changdao, East Island had recognized the Purgatory of Heaven capital. This was the best choice. If the Purgatory of Heaven capital didn't appear, the whole East Island would not have the strength to stop the outbreak of Li Tianlan and the attack of the Wang family of Beihai. At that time, the whole special warfare system of East Island would fall, and the royal family would be forced to give up everything under the huge pressure. The whole special warfare system would fall into the hands of Zhongzhou State and the Wang family of Beihai. Without this sharp blade in the Dark World, all the future development of East Island would be greatly constrained. The Purgatory of Heaven capital forced the Wang family of Beihai to retreat. To some extent, it saved East Island. At least Tianhai Wuji and Lusheng Zhangquan, 2 superiors of the Invincible Realm, were still there. They were still the special warfare force controlled by the royal family. And the most noteworthy thing was the Purgatory of Heaven capital itself. They were different from the complicated beliefs and stances behind the 5 superpowers, which were supported by financial groups, politics, or religions. They were also different from Zhongzhou State. The Purgatory of Heaven capital had no stance. They only did everything for themselves. This was very similar to the Samsara Palace, and it was the easiest for East Island to accept when there was no other choice. For East Island, the Purgatory of Heaven capital had no stance, which meant that it had the possibility of being assimilated. On the premise of retaining part of its own strength, the Purgatory of Heaven capital could take the lead of the special warfare system of East Island and help them build a foundation in East Island. In a short time, even if the Purgatory of Heaven capital wouldn't help East Island risk its life, at least because they had no stance, they wouldn't go against East Island without hurting their interests. That was enough. And in the future, when they completely accepted the Purgatory of Heaven capital, and Deity was willing to fight for East Island, that would be the best result. East Island chose the Purgatory of Heaven capital, which had no stance. Imperceptibly, it actually gave the Purgatory of Heaven capital a stance. The key was to see what they would do in the future. But no matter what, after tonight, East Island had the possibility to keep a super superior who was strong enough to rival Wang Tianzong in East Island. That was the most important thing. Deity looked at Crown Prince Renha in silence and didn't speak for a long time. Cold sweat dripped down from Crown Prince Renha's forehead. He was the Crown Prince of East Island with a high position and power. But under absolute force, he was also a non-entity. Crown Prince Renha's body bent more and more, as if he wanted to kneel on the ground under Deity's feet. Deity's eyes turned and fell on Tianhai Wuji and Lusheng Zhangquan. His eyes were gentle, but the 2 invincible realm saber and sword grandmasters felt the inviolable majesty at the same time. They looked at each other, bowed at the same time, and said in a dry voice, "Your Highness." "Ha," Deity chuckled. He hadn't gone to Dongdu Imperial Palace yet, but he issued the first order. Prepare 5 boats. Crown Prince Runhe responded subconsciously, and then he froze. Out of instinct, he looked at the battlefield. Zhongzhou State, Fantasy World, Knights Templars, the Polar Ground Alliance, and the Heroes Club. There were exactly 5 families. No one in the Jiang family of South America survived. Sure enough, Deity waved his hand and said blandly, "Tell them to get out." Crown Prince Runhe wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. Finally, he bowed and left. From the standpoint of East Island at this time, with the Purgatory of Heaven capital, it was in the best interest of East Island for them to keep all the forces here. But the first order of God could not be violated in any case, and no one dared to violate it. He made a phone call and withdrew all the troops on the edge of the battlefield. Then he looked at the 5 superpowers, including Zhongzhou State. "Everyone please." The Polar Ground Alliance was the first to turn around and retreat to the north coast, waiting for their boats. "Send a message back to your master for me." In the stiff formation of the superpowers, Deity's unhurried voice rang out. "You, as well as the other superpowers in the Dark World, get out of Heaven Capital and East Island with me within 12 hours. Otherwise, don't blame me for being impolite." The superpowers left one after another. Whether they were willing or not, they had failed in this battle of Changdao. A crushing defeat. The roar of the helicopter's rotor came from afar. Deity turned around and looked. In the northernmost area, the people of the Polar Ground Alliance had started to board. Deity walked to the helicopter that was gradually landing. All the people of East Island followed Deity. The people of Sanluo Hall and Athanasia Hall started to leave the battlefield. Phoenix in a fiery red dress turned around and looked at the members of the Hall of Longevity behind her. As she glanced around, many members of the Hall of Longevity showed an unnatural expression. The tacit understanding of the Hall of Longevity was still there, but they seemed a little strange to her, the Hall Master. Phoenix waved her hand. The Hall of Longevity also started to retreat. Only Saint and Military Counselor were left on the battlefield. Saint looked at the people of the Polar Ground Alliance boarding the ship. The killing intent flashed in his eyes, but he suppressed it in the end. "That's it," Saint said. Military Counselor's tone was a little solemn. "Boss, something was wrong just now." "Yeah." Saint was silent for a while and sighed softly. "We can't help her when it comes to love. Love was a matter between 2 people. Even if their hearts were dead, even if they were desperate, it had nothing to do with others." "What's your plan?" Military Counselor looked at the sea ahead and asked. Saint narrowed his eyes and said softly, "I'm going to stay in East Island for a while. At least, I have to solve the problem in Tianlan, and then discuss the next step of cooperation with the Purgatory of Heaven capital." "What about you?" "You're really busy." Military Counselor laughed. On the battlefield where only the 2 of them were left, they talked to each other casually, as if they were really old friends. "Of course I'm going back to Zhongzhou State. I'm going to take a break for a while and take it as a long vacation." Saint smiled with some playfulness. "Take a break? How many people are most afraid of you taking a break? When you take a break, it's the real bloodbath, right?" Military Counselor smiled and didn't say anything. When he took a break, he was no longer the second Heaven King Military Counselor of Samsara. For some people, this was the most terrible thing. "About Tianlan, have you decided?" Military Counselor suddenly changed the topic and asked. Saint was silent. At this time, everyone was far away from the battlefield. In the starlight and the sea breeze, only the 2 of them in black were left. Saint took off his cloak, revealing a thin and determined face, with sword-like eyebrows and starry eyes, handsome and vicissitudes of life. "I can't refuse." Saint lit a cigarette for himself. "And it's just a temporary step back. It's nothing. I hope I can let Tianlan go further by taking a step back." It was just a step back. But this step was a step back from the top of the half-step invincible realm to the peak of the thunder-shocking realm. Even if it was only temporary, it was still a big step for people like Saint who didn't have many opportunities. It was a big step. Military Counselor didn't say anything. A long time ago, the 2 of them had already known, whether in terms of life level or martial arts level. The extreme of samsara. It was nirvana. Chapter 260. When deity got off the helicopter, it was late at night. In the darkest time before dawn, the imperial palace of Dongdu was quiet, and only the lights were shining. This breakfast was a little early. The imperial palace here was also a little small. Looking at Crown Prince Renhe, who was leading the way, deity thought silently. The two walked through the imperial palace in the middle of the night. Along the way, all the lights in the imperial palace were lit up, as if they were paying tribute. It was not a suitable time to visit, but the whole imperial family gave them the highest courtesy. The Mikado and the Empress walked out of the bedchamber and walked down the steps to welcome the new dominator of the East Island's special warfare system. No matter how they felt inside, they both smiled like a spring breeze. The Mikado was nearly 60 years old, and he was short. After his handsome face got older, he gave people the impression of his demeanor and wisdom. The Empress was a little younger, but she was still beautiful. She stood beside the Mikado with a sweet smile, gentle and generous. Deity walked up to them. The Mikado took the initiative to speak. He looked at deity in front of him with soft eyes and a soft tone. "Welcome, Your Highness. I asked the Empress to prepare breakfast in person, and I hope Your Highness will like it." The Mikado turned his head to welcome the guest with a warm smile. It was a kind of warmth without any emotion, very sincere, but the sincerity was like a mask with boundless calmness and calmness. "I don't have much time." Deity shook his head. "If the Mikado has something to say, just say it. I won't have breakfast." He called the Mikado, not His Majesty. Obviously, psychologically, deity completely put his position on the same level as the Mikado. The royal family of East Island never seemed to have any real power, but for generations the royal family could give up everything, but they always firmly held the power of the special warfare system in their own hands. This result would inevitably change after the rise of the purgatory of Heaven Capital. The Mikado, who was mentally prepared, kept his smile and asked casually, "Your Highness, are you in a hurry?" To save him. Deity's tone was also calm. The Mikado nodded and said thoughtfully, "Li Tunlon? Can he still be saved?" 80%. Deity's tone was calm. But the atmosphere in front of the bedchamber suddenly became a little tense. "Your Highness, please." The Mikado was silent for a while, then he reached out his hand again and gestured for deity to enter. He was still smiling, but his eyes were completely calm, with an irresistible temperament. Deity chuckled and walked straight into the bedchamber. The dining room of the bedchamber had prepared a full table of standard Japanese breakfast, but no one knew if it was cooked by the queen. God sat down and drank the sake without saying a word. Although Li Tianlan is young, he has terrible potential. If Your Highness saves him, he may become a big problem for East Island in the future. Now that Your Highness controls the special warfare system of East Island, you should think about East Island. I don't think it's appropriate to save this person." In the silent atmosphere, the emperor looked at God and said seriously. Previously, they did not know each other. The reason they could sit together was because of the general trend. Thus, there was no need to be polite to each other. God wanted to get straight to the point, so the Emperor of Mikado went straight to the point. Li Tianlan is nothing to be afraid of. In the end, he is still too young. Deity played with the wine glass in his hand and said casually, "I know what you are worried about. But for some special reasons he had to live now. But he won't grow up. I saved him today, and when the time is right in the future, I will personally kill him." Special reason? Special reasons. Is it because of the cooperation with Samsara Palace? Deity's hand that was playing with the wine glass paused slightly. He raised his head and looked at the Mikado in front of him. "This is very important," he said in a calm tone. The Mikado nodded and said, "Oh, I have a favor to ask," Deity suddenly said. The Mikado ate a mouthful of sashimi, and a strange light flashed in his eyes. He said with a smile, "What do you want?" "Information." Deity's tone was still calm, and the black cloak covered his whole face. But at this moment, he gave the Mikado an extremely gloomy and cold feeling. Within 7 days, I need to know which special people have been to Ninghu. All the people of the half-step invincible realm are special people. Huawu died in Ninghu. This was the most strange thing and the biggest accident for the purgatory of heaven capital. With Huawu's strength, no one of the half-step invincible realm could kill him. Even if he couldn't beat them, he could always escape. If it wasn't an invincible realm expert who took action in person, it could only mean that Huawu died in a siege. And it could only be caused by the siege of at least several half-step invincible realm experts. Deity was now the new master of the special warfare system of East Island, but there was still a gap between the name and the reality. In a short time, he couldn't really keep his word in East Island. But avenging his son had become Deity's obsession. This was the most important thing for him right now. I can give you the information in 3 days. The Mikado said in a calm tone, that's all you need. The dark world of East Island is all mine. What else can I ask for? Deity shook his head in self-mockery. I really want a son, but he's dead. He died in Ninghu a few days ago. The Mikado subconsciously tightened his body. Then he knew why Deity wanted that list. His old eyes looked at Crown Prince Renhe, who stood respectfully at the dining table, and then looked at the Empress beside him. The Empress's charming and beautiful eyes looked complicated. The Mikado seemed to have made up his mind. He suddenly raised his voice and said, Ziyi. The sound of light footsteps could be heard. Under the bright light in the bedchamber, a touch of heart-shaking purple footsteps walked into the dining room. The purple palace dress fluttered, and her black hair was like clouds. She was a stunning beauty of about 23 or 24 years old. She was tall and beautiful, but the most attractive thing about her was her temperament. It was as if she was born with a reserved and noble temperament, which was a dazzling color in the eyes of the opposite sex. This is my daughter, Princess Ziyi. The Mikado looked at Deity with a serious look in his eyes. Your Highness, I can give you whatever you want. You lost a son in Ninghu, and Ziyi can give you another one. From now on, my daughter is your woman. He looked at Deity and said word by word, Your Highness, I'm willing to treat the purgatory of heaven capital with the greatest sincerity. I hope the purgatory of heaven capital won't betray me in the end. Princess Ziyi blushed, and her bright eyes peeked at Deity, who was completely wrapped in a black cloak. She bit her lip, and her expression was complicated. What do you want? Deity's tone was calm and calm. He waved to Princess Ziyi. The delicate and noble young woman came to him with some hidden bitterness. Deity stretched out his hand impudently and held Ziyi's young but noble body in his arms. He smelled the fragrance from her hair, felt the stiffness and softness of her body, and asked the Mikado, My country is too small, and I can't do anything. I hope your Highness can help me. Looking at his daughter sitting on Deity's lap, the Mikado smiled happily. I see. Deity nodded. I know what you mean, and I will help you. The Mikado was overjoyed, and even lost his composure. He stood up, bowed deeply to Deity, and said solemnly, Thank you, your Highness. Deity waved his hand, motioning Crown Prince Renhe and the Queen to leave. When their figures disappeared in the dining room, he coughed slightly and said, But I need time. About 2 years. He said calmly, I need to heal my wounds. The Mikado was stunned, and his voice trembled. You're injured? You're no match for Wang Tianzong? The first on the divine list. How could he have any match? But he's not much better. His injuries are just a little lighter than mine. Deity shook his head. So even for your plan, the cooperation between the purgatory of heaven capital and the Samsara palace is extremely important. The Mikado was silent. After a long time, he nodded. I see. Deity said. He suddenly reached out and pinched Ziyi's white and tender chin. Ziyi looked at Deity weakly and timidly, and her plump red lips trembled slightly. Would you like to have a son for me? Deity's tone was indifferent. Ziyi blushed. She was a noble princess, but she was still a young woman who had never been in contact with a man. She had to answer such a shameful question when she was hugged by a man for the first time. How could she say it? Say it. Deity said with an indisputable tone. I'd like to. Z whispered like a mosquito. After saying this, she buried her face in Deity's arms as if she didn't dare to see anyone. The Mikado smiled and said nothing. Ziyi and the other princess were originally prepared for Li Tianlan. Now, it seemed much better to give them to Deity. Deity stood up and put his arms around Ziye's waist. If Ziyi and I have children, what will happen in the future? Deity looked at the Mikado and asked. The Mikado's heart trembled, and he said subconsciously, "What do you want?" Crown Prince. Deity's tone was arrogant and domineering. If Ziyi and I have children, he must be the Crown Prince of East Island. The Mikado didn't respond. Deity held Ziyi and turned to the dining room. If you fight with Wang Tianzong, what will happen? The Mikado's voice sounded behind him. He was a little hesitant, as if he couldn't make up his mind. If I die, he will be useless. Deity's tone was calm. That's about it, he paused and continued, but if I enter the invincible realm, it will be different. The Mikado's expression changed dramatically. He looked at Deity incredulously and trembled. You're not in the invincible realm? If I'm not in the invincible realm, how can I have the face to say that I've entered the invincible realm? Deity's tone was disdainful. Like those good-for-nothings in your East Island? The invincible realm is the invincible realm of the invincible realm. In the whole dark world, only Wang Tianzong deserves the title of invincible realm. Without saying more, he walked out of the bedchamber and out of the palace with Ziyi in his arms. The night of the 7th day began to fade away. There was a glimmer of light in the sky. Deity took Ziya's hand and walked down the steps in front of the palace. A fiery red dress crawled on the steps in the most pious and humble posture, facing Deity. Deity narrowed his eyes slightly and looked at the moving and tempting body curve in his sight. As far as he knew, only Phoenix liked to wear this color. But the woman in front of him was not Phoenix. What's the matter? Deity asked. Mai Shiranui, the palace master of Yohua Palace, greets your highness. Mai Shiranui's body became more and more humble. Her delicate hands moved forward, holding up the token that represented the highest power of Liohua Palace. She didn't hide her intention of surrender at all. Get up, Deity said. Mai Shiranui stood up hesitantly. Her hands still moved forward, and she handed over the token in her hand. Deity didn't take it. He said calmly, keep it? Mai Shiranui's beautiful face looked stunned. Let's go. Deity said and walked down the steps. Mai Shiranui, who looked surprised, followed Deity closely. She said in a trembling voice, Thank you, Your Highness. In the black cloak, facing the dawn of the new day, Deity laughed. His eyes were calm, but he was laughing with his claws and teeth. There was a glimmer of light in the sky of East Island. The morning sun had risen on the border between Zhongzhou State and Annan State. The golden light shrouded the earth. The light passed through the dense forest and fell on the plain. The entire battlefield was a sea of blood. The battle was over. The living and the dead, the martyrs and the warriors gathered together. Heaven and earth were silent. The unidentified rebels and the elites of the 5 superpowers had disappeared without a trace. There were a lot of corpses on the ground, and those who were alive had already fled to the distance. Only the military flag of Zhongzhou State's Border Control Corps and the star flag of Zhongzhou State were flying on the battlefield at the same time, shining with bloody light in the morning sun. There were less than 5,000 people left in the Thunderbolt Battalion, the most elite of Zhongzhou State's Border Control Corps. But at this moment, everyone still stood neatly in a formation that could attack at any time. Even if there were no enemies in front of them. Dongqing Wudi, the Marshal of Zhongzhou State and the commander of the Border Control Corps, walked straight ahead on the silent battlefield, all the way south. The military flag of the Border Control Corps and the star flag of Zhongzhou State stood side by side in the southernmost position, whistling in the cold morning wind. An old figure appeared in the south and walked slowly over. In the morning wind, he was also holding a flagpole in his hand. On the flagpole, the star flag had been riddled with holes, but it kept breaking. The broken star flag danced in the air, looking more and more piercing. One figure after another came out from behind the old man holding the flagpole. The whole place was silent. Dong Qingwudi, who was standing under the flag of the army, suddenly felt hot in his eyes. He looked at the old man in his sight and the veterans behind him. A team of more than 100 people. This was the remaining Li family. They fought against the elites of the 5 superpowers and the Saint War Angel of the Vatican. After several days and nights of fierce fighting, there were less than 50 people left in the team of more than 100 people. But everyone's expression was calm. No regrets. Dong Qingwudi slowly raised his arm. Behind him, the commanders of the 4 armies, Wang Wandian, Shi Hanbing, Qing Huaining, and Xiao Dongzhan, raised their arms at the same time. Every soldier of the Thunderbolt Battalion also raised his arm. Salute! The old man holding the flag slowly returned the salute. He came to Dong Qingwudi. I'm still old. Li Honghe smiled. I didn't catch that little guy, and he ran away. Senior Li, Dong Qingwudi couldn't control his trembling voice at all. He took a deep breath and said in a trembling voice, "You've done enough. Please pay attention to your own health. It doesn't matter." Li Honghe shook his head. I'm too tired. We're all too tired. From now on, the Li family will only live for the Li family. In any case, the Li family is a hero. Dong Qingwudi looked at Li Honghe and said in a firm tone. Li Honghe smiled. He was a hero. Throughout his life, he was worthy of this title. But what could a hero do? He looked up into the distance. In his sight, the beautiful mountains and rivers were covered with blood. A little tired. Li Honghe shook his head. I'm tired. He turned to look at the Li family's team of less than 50 people and whispered, Let's go home. From Dong Qingwudi to the ordinary soldiers, everyone saluted at the same time and watched Li Honghe and others leave the battlefield. In the silence, Li Honghe's figure disappeared. Dong Qingwudi suddenly reached out, pulled out the army flag beside him, and shouted, Where is this? Zhongzhou State, Zhongzhou State, Zhongzhou State. A tsunami of cheers suddenly sounded and swept through the world. Where was this? A few days ago, they broke through the border between Zhongzhou State and Annan State. Today, after fighting all the way, the Li family and the Border Control Corps had penetrated 800 miles into the territory of Annan State. But it didn't matter. Now this was Zhongzhou State. It could only be Zhongzhou State. The roar of the helicopter's rotors sounded in the sky. 2 figures jumped down from the helicopter one after the other and landed on the ground. Wang Tianzong, Dijiang. Dong Qingwudi narrowed his eyes, hesitated, and walked toward them. Wang Tianzong quietly looked at the blood-stained battlefield in his sight, as if looking at his own country. Dong Qingwudi came over. Well done. Thank you for your hard work. Wang Tianzong turned his head and looked at Dong Qingwudi. I'm just keeping my promise. Thanks to Senior Li this time. Dong Qingwudi's tone was indifferent. Wang Tianzong was silent for a moment. Finally, he changed the topic and pointed to Dijiang beside him. From today on, he will be in charge of the new army. The Heaven Punishment Troop will also be stationed here temporarily. Dong Qingwudi nodded and turned a blind eye to Dijiang's outstretched hand. He just said blandly, I will replenish the Thunderbolt Battalion as soon as possible and complete the handover. He turned and left. From now on, the former Thunderbolt Battalion no longer existed. Dong Qingwudi would completely replenish the Thunderbolt Battalion to 20,000 people, and the 20,000 people with the most combat power among the hundreds of thousands of troops of the Border Control Corps, together with the 800 miles of land, would belong to the Wang family of Beihai. Dong Qingwudi might rebuild the Thunderbolt Battalion after the handover, but that Thunderbolt would not be the current Thunderbolt after all. The current Thunderbolt Battalion would stay here with Dijiang and play the role they should play. In the general trend, after the fight, everything was a deal. It was all about balance and compromise. The morning sun rose into the sky. Dark clouds floated over the sky. The golden sun was blocked. Li Honghe had gone far with the people of the Li family. Summer and autumn were alternating. Rain fell from the sky in the early morning. It was another rainstorm. Dongqing Wudi withdrew from the border. All the superpowers began to withdraw from Changdao. This seemed to be an era of constant withdrawal and turmoil. What Li Hong has said to Dongqing Wudi spread. After the final battle, the Li family, which had been silent for many years, began to live only for the Li family. The Li family began to really withdraw from Zhongzhou state and dissipated its afterglow. Time passed quickly. It also withdrew quickly. Samsara Palace began to withdraw from Zhongzhou state. Everyone thought that the cooperation between Samsara Palace and the Purgatory of Heaven capital was a betrayal to Zhongzhou state, and it was true. But when everyone wanted to settle accounts with Samsara Palace, they found that there was nothing to find. They had no foundation in Zhongzhou state. The only foundation was Qin Weibai's Pre-Qin International Group. Pre-Qin International Group was acquired by all parties in the shortest time, and the whole group was renamed. In just a few days, Samsara Palace completely eliminated the last trace of itself in Zhongzhou state. All the details of the Battle of Changdao were publicized. Li Tianlan's name began to shine throughout the dark world for the first time. A 19-year-old invincible realm expert. No matter how coincidental the result was, at least Li Tianlan did amaze the whole dark world that night. The names of the 3 young heavenly sons of Zhongzhou state began to disappear. Li Tianlan became the only heavenly son of Zhongzhou state. No one said anything, even Kunlun city and the Wang family of Beihai. Because Li Tianlan was dead. The rise of the Purgatory of Heaven capital in East Island shocked the whole dark world. The mysterious deity of fearless Wang Tianzong, the 3 halls of Sanluo, life-prolonging, and Athanasi that had never appeared became the hottest topics in the dark world. And the appearance of deity also aroused the vigilance of all the big shots in the dark world. Some people had begun to guess the relationship between the Purgatory of Heaven capital and the Samsara Palace. At this time, people suddenly remembered that the general trend in the dark world started from the destruction of Night Spirit and the Samsara Palace's desire to lay the foundation for itself. More recently, it all started from the final battle between the master of Samsara Palace and Gu Xingyun, the god of war of Zhongzhou state. And all this was just the mysterious Samsara Palace's desire to get a bigger voice and more benefits in the dark world. But after everything was over, the Samsara Palace still kept silent. They still had no foundation. All this benefited the Purgatory of Heaven capital. It seemed to be a real help. The Purgatory of Heaven capital got a list. Although it was not the list that deity wanted the most, it was a list that made all the dark superpowers angry and even frightened. In less than 3 days after the final battle of Changdao, deity personally killed 4 superiors of the half-step invincible realm from the superpowers who had hidden in East Island and never left. Several secret agencies of the dark superpowers in East Island were completely destroyed. In just a few days, there were only the Purgatory of Heaven capital and the forces of East Island left in the land of East Island. The Mikado was delighted and announced that deity was the national god of war of East Island for the first time. And the dark superpowers of the entire East Island, because of the participation of the Purgatory of Heaven capital and after the final battle of Changdao, seemed to be more confident than before. As if in response to the arrogance of the Purgatory of Heaven capital and East Island, Gu Qianchuan, the first elder of Kunlun city, and Sidu Cangyue, the governor of Sai city, returned to Zhongzhou state from Northern Europe and North America respectively. Several superpowers, led by Zhongzhou state, cooperated with each other at the first time. The currency war that had been in stalemate in East Island for many days completely broke out in one day. In the international market, the yen began to rise crazily, and the rise was almost desperate. It was September. The currency of East Island had appreciated nearly 6 times as much as before. Unimaginable wealth had been plundered by various countries and consortiums. Countless enterprises and groups in East Island had closed down one after another, and countless families had gone bankrupt. East Island was in chaos and suffering. Almost at the same time, Annan State submitted a petition to the United Nations to protest against Zhongzhou State. The president of Annan State went to the headquarters of the United Nations in person and accused Zhongzhou State of occupying the land of hundreds of miles around Annan State and stationing tens of thousands of troops. Annan State asked Zhongzhou State to withdraw its troops immediately. The explanation given by Zhongzhou State was to help Annan State suppress the rebellion. After Annan State made it clear that it refused Zhongzhou State's kindness, Zhongzhou State said that it would withdraw its troops within 24 hours. It didn't take 24 hours at all. The reorganized Thunderbolt Battalion only took a few minutes to take off their uniforms and burn them completely. 20,000 troops plus the Heaven Punishment Troop were stationed in the land that originally belonged to Annan State. From any point of view, they had nothing to do with Zhongzhou State. Dongqing Wudi began to form a new Thunderbolt Battalion. The aftermath of the general trend was still spreading, but there was no more turbulence on the whole. The midsummer gradually passed. Time went forward and it was autumn. The general trend was slowly dissipating, and the dispute was ending. There were only ripples left in the whole dark world. Chapter 261. This year, the final battle of Changdao seemed to be the dividing line of the entire dark world. The noise and chaos before the war formed a sharp contrast with the peace and quiet after the war. The Sky Academy and the Deep Sea Academy reopened. To be exact, it was the official start of school. The first semester of the two academies was roughly between April and May. After the entrance maneuver, all the courses would officially open after a short break. But this year's special situation broke the rule. Changdao postponed everything for a few months, and the official start of school was set in September. The students of the two academies returned to the academy to report, and the standard of the opening ceremony skyrocketed. President Li Huaqing, the leader of the academics of Zhongzhou State, came to the Sky Academy accompanied by Gu Xingyun, the governor of Kunlun City, and Yi Dongxing, the god of army of Zhongzhou State. Chen Fangqing, the leader of the Prince Group and prime minister of Zhongzhou State, went to the Deep Sea Academy accompanied by Marshal Qi Beizong, the minister of the army headquarters, and Marshal Dongqing Wudi, the commander of the Border Control Corps. Huading in September was still hot. The chaos that spread from the Sky Academy to the whole of Huading had passed, and the whole city was quiet. The entrance ceremony had been held a few months ago, and the class division had been completed. All the early procedures were directly skipped. The entire Sky Academy stood in phalanxes one after another according to the class. As the headmaster, Zhuang Huayang also had a square formation behind him. It was the smallest of all the contestants. There were only 17 people. Among them, 2 had lost their arms and 10 were seriously injured. Zhuang Huayang held a list of the dead in his hand. When Zhongzhou State conspired against East Island, both the Deep Sea Academy and the Sky Academy sent out their most elite students. The so-called most elite students naturally referred to the classes led by the 2 headmasters. After several months of killing, there were only 17 left from the original 50. The scene was solemn and sorrowful. The official opening of the school was at the gate of the Sky Academy without a gate. In front of the huge stone carved with the words "The Land of Heroes." The names of the previous victims of the Sky Academy were carved on the boulder. Zhuang Huayang stood in front of the boulder, holding a carving knife in his hand. He carved one name after another. The carving knife had red paint on it, and the carved names were also red as blood. The audience looked at Zhuang Huayang's movements with respect and did not speak. Zhuang Huayang engraved the names on the list one by one until there was only one left. He was a person that the entire world knew. He turned around and looked at the front of the crowd. President Li Huaqing of Zhongzhou State, who came to watch the ceremony, looked serious. Dressed in a black suit, he looked mournful and regretful. Li Huaqing turned his head and glanced at Gu Xingyun's face. Just as Gu Xingyun was about to make a move, Li Huaqing had already set his eyes on the face of a woman beside him. The woman was extremely beautiful, but her expression was somewhat wooden and empty. It was Situ Cangyue, the governor of Sai City, who had returned to Huading from North America. Instead of returning to Sai City, she stayed in the Sky Academy to recuperate with tribulation. "Thank you, Cangyue." Li Huaqing slowly opened his mouth, and his face seemed to struggle to form a strained smile. Situ Cangyue nodded and waved her long sleeves. A gentle force suddenly lifted Li Huaqing up. His body rose until it was as tall as the boulder. Gu Xingyun's pupils shrank slightly, and a sneer appeared at the corner of his mouth, but he did not speak. A land of heroes. The word, hero, was carved at the top of the stone tablet. The surroundings were empty. Li Huaqing stared at the boulder and held the carving knife in his hand tightly. Slowly, with great force, he carved the first stroke. He engraved it with great force, and the font was not small, so the name was very clear. There was a suffocating atmosphere on the scene. A name slowly took shape under Li Huaqing's carving knife and became neat, lively and vigorous. Li Tianlan. A name, a legend, a heavenly son. Under everyone's gaze, President Li Huaqing personally engraved the name of the last person who died in the Battle of the Sky Academy. It was engraved at the top of the stone tablet. It was clear and distinct. Salute to the hero. Behind Li Huaqing came Yi Dongsheng's roar with all his might. All the teachers and students, including Li Huaqing and Gu Xingyun, raised their hands to salute. The sun shone on the boulder. Outside the Sky Academy, the river and the sea converged. On the sunny ground, thousands of teachers and students raised their hands silently and forcefully, looking solemn. After the glory of the Li family was extinguished, Li Tianlan became the most dazzling young man in the whole dark world. Many people present had not even seen him, but everyone knew that if it weren't for him, the final battle of Changdao might have had a different result. The scene under the starry sky that day was really too complicated. If Li Tianlan hadn't appeared, what could Wang Tianzong and the Heaven Punishment Troop do? Wang Tianzong would have faced the siege of 5 invincible realm experts and 2 murderous weapons, including deity. At that time, the final battle had reached a critical point. When no one knew how terrifying deity's strength was, Wang Tianzong, who ranked first on the divine list, appeared in Changdao, which would make everyone instinctively unite as if they were facing a formidable enemy. 5 invincible realm experts, 2 murderous weapons, several half-step invincible realm experts, and more superiors at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm. Even if Wang Tianzong had extraordinary abilities, how could he protect himself? If there was no Li Tianlan, what would happen to Wang Tianzong, Zhongzhou State, and the Wang family of Beihai? Just thinking about that kind of scene would make people's blood freeze. Similarly, Li Tianlan's achievements were also shocking. To some extent, he saved the stability of the special warfare system of Zhongzhou State. Even if it wasn't his intention, it didn't matter. What mattered was the result. He was a hero. He was a hero. Li Beidian quietly looked at Li Tianlan's name on the stone tablet, with confusion in his eyes. There were thousands of sword intents in Mount Shu. The 4 sword masters of Mount Shu were pure swordsmen. With Li Baitian's identity, he didn't need to come to the Sky Academy to study, and he wouldn't be assigned to the same dormitory as Li Tianlan, which seemed to be a coincidence. Everything had been arranged. Ning Qianqing should be the same. He was with Li Tianlan because of Dongqing Wudi's order. Li Beidian was entrusted by someone. First senior brother also knew about this. After a detailed understanding, he finally acquiesced in the fact that he and Yi Huayu came to the Sky Academy. The mentality of deliberately getting close to him and making friends was actually very subtle. But after a short contact, Li Beidian felt that Li Tianlan was a good person. They once fought against the Lu family in the entrance maneuver and went through thick and thin together. In Changdao, when he learned that he and Ning Qianqing were in danger, he rushed from Changdao to Zhongjing without hesitation and went through thick and thin together. Up to now, they hadn't been together for a long time, but it didn't matter how they got together. Now they were brothers and recognized each other, and that was enough. Ning Qianqing's body swayed a little in the crowd. His current injury was so serious that he could barely walk on the ground. Yu Qingyan supported him by his side and looked at the frightening name on the stone tablet with him. Yu Qingyan's eyes were a little red and swollen, as if she had been crying. But Ning Qianqing looked calm. He didn't believe that Li Tianlan was dead, even though Li Tianlan died in front of him with a sword through his chest. But Qin Weibai's reaction at that time seemed a little abnormal. The battlefield was too chaotic at that time. All kinds of sword energy whistled between heaven and earth, and all the scenes seemed to be faintly discernible. But somehow, maybe because he wasn't far from Li Tianlan, Ning Qianqing saw everything at that time. He didn't hear a lot of words, but he saw Qin Weibai's performance. The sword directly penetrated Li Tianlan's heart, and blood burst out under the starlight. At that moment, Qin Weibai was very calm. She seemed to have expected this kind of thing, or she had already expected that kind of result. When he took Li Tianlan from Saint's arms, his hands were trembling, but it wasn't fear, it was pure heartache. From the beginning to the end, he never felt the despair of losing a loved one from Qin Weibai. He just felt a deep sense of guilt and desolation. The people from the purgatory of heaven capital took away Li Tianlan's body. At that moment, Ning Qianqing, who was already seriously injured, vaguely saw Qin Weibai turn around. Extremely resolute. It was hard for him to understand the feelings between Li Tianlan and Qin Weibai. But if she hadn't carved the feelings into her bones and blood, she wouldn't have had that kind of look in her eyes when she held Li Tianlan's body. If everything was really irreversible, why would Qin Weibai turn around so resolutely and throw away Li Tianlan's body? Ning Qianqing thought of the text message he received this morning. The text message was from his father, who hadn't contacted him for several years. Now, because hundreds of fire-flaming realm elites from the Eastern Theater of Operations were lost in Changdao, the strength of the Eastern Theater of Operations was greatly reduced. His father should have been badly battered at this time. The general trend is clear. Do what you have to do. Ning Qianqing thought of the text message and turned to look at Li Beitian beside him. Do you really believe? Before he could finish his words, Li Beitian shook his head and interrupted him. That name is really an eyesore. Li Beitian looked at the stone tablet in front of him and said. Wang Yuetong was also looking at the stone tablet in front of her. Her eyes were dazed and blurred. The pride of the little princess of the Wang family of Beihai began to fade bit by bit. When Li Huaqing completely carved the name on the stone tablet, she couldn't help it anymore. She trembled slightly and burst into tears. In the days before Li Tianlan's departure, Wang Yuetong could feel his intimacy towards her and his occasional possessiveness. The two of them had slept in the same bed. All this showed that Li Tianlan seemed to have accepted her identity. An identity that didn't seem to be very glorious. But Wang Yuetong didn't care about this. Not because she really didn't care, but because she didn't think it was necessary. She really liked Li Tianlan. She liked him so much that she was willing to give herself to him completely. But Wang Yuetong didn't think about the future. Maybe she occasionally thought that the resentment between the Wang family and the Li family would slowly disappear because of her and Li Tianlan, but fantasy could only be fantasy after all. She was the little princess of the Wang family of Beihai and had a noble status. But in the rise and fall of the wealthy families and in the general trend of Zhongzhou state, it was insignificant. So Wang Yuetong didn't think about the future. She just liked Li Tianlan and wanted to be with him. Even if they would separate in the future, at least they had each other. The unseen future was right in front of her. She thought how ridiculous the so-called identity was. Maybe it was enough to be with him without regrets. Wang Yuetong took out her mobile phone with trembling hands. On the mobile phone's communication software were the messages that Wang Yuetong had sent to Li Tianlan in the past few months. They were all trivial things, like a little girl who liked to pester her boyfriend. Li Tianlan didn't reply to any of them. How could Li Tianlan reply when he was plotting against East Island in the general trend and he wasn't sure if he would have a huge conflict with the Wang family of Beihai now? He didn't reply, and he couldn't reply in the future. Wang Yuetong's eyes became more and more desolate. She couldn't imagine how resolute the cruel man was when he pulled out the sword for Qin Weibai in Changdao. She couldn't imagine his reluctance and melancholy after the sword light dissipated. Everything seemed to be doomed. She and he really had no future. Not separation, but death. Like was no longer like. She looked at the gradually blurring name on the stone tablet. Until this moment, Wang Yuetong realized that she really fell in love with that man. But he was already dead. The crowd began to disperse. Zhuang Huayang accompanied Li Huaqing, Gu Xingyun, and others to his office. Now the most awe-inspiring pair of sister and brother in the dark world of Zhongzhou state stayed where they were, quietly looking at the stone tablet in front of them. What will happen to him? Sidu Tsangyue looked at Li Tianlan's name and suddenly asked. Who? Tribulation's eyes were dim. He looked at his sister in white beside him and asked softly. The question was actually obvious. But Situ Tsangyue seemed to be stumped by her own question. After a long time, she said softly, What will happen to Dunlan? I don't know. Tribulation shook his head. He really didn't know. But Samsara is quiet. Saint has returned to Zhongzhou state. Tribulation thought for a moment and said again. Samsara was quiet, which was the best news. Samsara withdrew from Zhongzhou state. Huh. Sidu Tsangyue shook her head and did not continue. On the surface, Samsara did withdraw from Zhongzhou state, but it only lost Preqin International Group. Saint returned to Zhongzhou state. Combined with what they gained from this trip, Samsara could even be said to have taken another step forward in Zhongzhou state. Don't you want to ask something else? Tribulation said. What? Situ Tsangyue raised her eyebrows slightly. Ask him. Tribulation said calmly. Senluo life prolonging vitality, what's there to ask? Situ Tsangyue said indifferently, he is not him. Otherwise, how could Tianlan die? Not die. Tribulation corrected Situ Tsangyue's statement. He has died. There's nothing different about it. Situ Tsangyue shook her head. Tribulation said no more. A trace of blood flowed down the corner of his mouth. Under the silver mask, Tribulation tightly pursed his lips, and his eyes seemed to become dimmer. What happened? Situ Tsangyue's eyes turned cold. Haven't you controlled the injury you got in Changdao? The injury in Changdao is under control. Tribulation smiled in a complicated tone. But the injury after the breakthrough can't be controlled. Even if I didn't break through at that time, I was sure that I could kill Miyamoto. But I could feel that it was the best chance for me to break through. I succeeded, and now I'm in the invincible realm. Tribulation laughed at himself. But it's better not to succeed. It's better not to enter the invincible realm. Isn't it ridiculous? Sidu Tsangyue did not laugh. Her body slowly tightened, and she looked at Tribulation without saying a word. At noon in late summer and early autumn, the sun was blazing. Tribulation stood quietly, like a lonely shadow. The dark world completely calmed down. As the Battle of Changdao passed, the dark superpowers, which had different losses, also entered a period of recuperation. The conflicts in all aspects were suppressed. Even if there were some waves, they became the internal affairs of the superpowers and countries. But all the superpowers knew that the current situation was not over. The current calm was merely the brewing of an even greater storm. Zhongzhou state began to deal with its internal affairs in an orderly manner. All the follow-up events after the final battle of Changdao were solved one by one. Li Tianlan was a topic that couldn't be avoided. After a few days of preparation, Kunlun city of Zhongzhou state finally reluctantly took out 2 new lists. When they saw the list, many people suddenly realized that it was time to re-rank the top 10 experts of the young generation in Zhongzhou state. It was time to re-rank not only the top 10 experts of the young generation, but also the top 10 contemporary experts of Zhongzhou state. No one was surprised by the rankings on the 2 new lists. The pattern of the top 10 experts of the young generation was completely changed. Li Tianlan became the well-deserved first place and the first expert of the young generation in Zhongzhou state. Wang Shengxiao followed him closely. He was no longer tied with Gu Hanshan. Gu Hanshan ranked 3rd. Dongqing Rushi moved back 1 place from the original ranking, but she surpassed Jiang Shangyu in front of her and ranked 4th. Li Beidian ranked 5th, second only to Jiang Shangyu. The 6th and 7th were a couple that surprised everyone. Ning Qianxing was on the list, while Yu Qingyan was on the list for the first time. The battle record of poisoning a thunder-shocking realm expert made this girl, who was good at using poison, famous in Zhongzhou state. If some people didn't think poison was a foreign object, Yu Qingyan's ranking would even be higher. The 8th was Du Hanyin, who had been on the list and then dropped out. After her wind vein was destroyed and mutated, it was no problem for her to be on the list. Wang Yuetong, who had never participated in the final battle of Changdao, dropped out of the list. The last two on the list were Qi Zhaoxi, the young master of Azura Path, who also didn't participate in the final battle of Changdao, and Zhongli Wuxin, the last disciple of the dean of the Deep Sea Academy. The list attracted a fair amount of attention, but not too many people talked about it. The list was updated every year, so it was obvious that it was not real. And the hottest topic was the ranking of the top 10 contemporary experts of the empire. The 10 people on the list, which was updated every 5 years, basically represented the peak combat capability of Zhongzhou state in the next 5 years. This was a big deal. The ranking of the young generation was fluctuating. The ranking of the older generation was also adjusting. And on this valuable list, Li Tianlan was also on the list. Wang Tianzong, Gu Xingyun, Sititangyu. After the top 3, Li Tianlan ranked 4th among the top 10 experts of Zhongzhou state. Behind him was Tribulation, who had broken through the Invincible Realm. The first elder of Kunlun City, who was also in the Invincible Realm, had been pushed to the 6th. Wei Kunlun, the Nirvana Sword Master of Mount Shu, ranked 7th. Dongqing Wudi, the god of massacre of Zhongzhou state, ranked 8th. The name of Zhuang Huayang, the headmaster of the Sky Academy, did not appear on the list. The 9th place was also a young man. Wang Shengxiao from the Wang family of Beihai. With the combat capability he had shown in Changdao, no one questioned this ranking. The 10th place was given to Hua Qingfeng, the sect master of the Shadow Sect and the Shadow Guard of Zhongzhou state who had been in Yuzhou all year round. In terms of quality, the ranking this time only looked at the surface. There was no doubt that the high-end combat capability of Zhongzhou state had greatly increased. The top 6 all had the combat capability of the Invincible Realm. The young Wang Shengxiao of the Thundershocking Realm entered the list, which gave people infinite expectations. But whether it was the list of the young generation or the list of the contemporary generation, one of them was always an illusion. Li Tianlan was already dead. In many people's eyes, these two lists had become the last traces of him in the world. But people who also believed that there would be miracles began to mention the things that Kunlun City had been unwilling to mention and publicize. Merit. Li Tianlan's merit. Everyone's merit. The Sky Academy had begun to count Li Tianlan's credits. Some people began to study the level of East Emperor Palace. The Sky Academy reported the calculated credits to Kunlun City. 80,000 credits. This was a number that was big enough to make anyone completely desperate. It broke the record of the highest credits since the establishment of the Sky Academy and the Deep Sea Academy. Kunlun City almost did not hesitate to reject the information reported by the Sky Academy. As a result, Headmaster Zhuang Huayang seemed to be angry and reported 100,000 credits for the second time. The credit statistics of the 2 special warfare academies had strict rules. But the problem was that Li Tianlan killed 2 Invincible Realm experts in Changdao and even took a murderous weapon, which could not be calculated at all. Even if Kunlun City rejected it, it dared not to reject Li Tianlan's credits alone, but to reject it with other people's. With Li Tianlan's merit at this time, even if Zhuang Huayang said 1 million credits, no one would say anything. Because Li Tianlan was a hero. Kunlun City was silent for 2 days and finally approved the credits reported by the Sky Academy. 100,000 credits. Of course, the 100,000 credits were not counted on Li Tianlan himself, but on the whole East Emperor Palace. But it didn't matter, because it was destined to be a number that could not be broken. The first place of this year's Sky Academy had been born in advance when the school started. Mount Dibbing. Wang Tianzong was also looking at the list in his hand. Sitting opposite him was Wang Shengxiao. The 9th place, is a little flamboyant. Wang Tianzong shook the list in his hand. But it doesn't matter. You've grown up now. My requirement for you remains the same. It's still the same word, caution. Why don't you let Brother Jiang do it? Wang Shengxiao took the list in Wang Tianzong's hand and asked. He looked at the names on it. Li Tianlan's name was on it. It was a little dazzling. It's not up to me to decide. Wang Tianzong shook his head. If Di Jiang appeared on the list, even if he couldn't suppress Gu Qianchuan, he would replace the ranking of Nirvana Swordmaster. But it was Kunlun City, the power center of the special warfare system of Zhongzhou State, that decided this kind of thing. No matter how powerful the Wang family of Beihai was, it couldn't control Gu Xingyun. Wang Xingxiao didn't say anything. He just quietly lowered his head and looked at the list in his hand, which seemed to be light and heavy. Not reconciled? Wang Tianzong asked, as if he knew what his son was thinking. Wang Xingxiao shook his head. After a moment of silence, he slowly said, "His performance in Changdao that day deserves to be remembered by Zhongzhou State. I have nothing to say about ranking fourth." Remembered by Zhongzhou State. Wang Tianzong gently narrowed his eyes, lit a cigarette, and said blandly, "Not just Zhongzhou State." Wang Xingxiao's palm trembled. He suddenly remembered another ranking in the Dark World this year. A ranking that represented the peak combat capability in the entire Dark World. This ranking was also an important reason for the battle between the Master of Samsara Palace and Gu Xingyun. The ranking on the World Divine List. He looked at Wang Tianzong in disbelief. Nothing strange. Wang Tianzong's tone was indifferent. A 19-year-old Invincible Realm expert killed 2 Invincible Realm experts in one battle, one of whom was the 9th on the Divine List. Li Tianlan will definitely enter the Divine List and be remembered by the entire Dark World. That was a sword light that could amaze the entire Dark World, not because of how powerful it was, but because of the vitality before the end of the road. The owner of that sword light was only 19 years old. A 19-year-old Invincible Realm expert was destined to be forgotten in a short time. "I've signed it." Wang Tianzong looked at Wang Xingxiao and said, "The ranking on the World Divine List required the joint signatures of all the known Invincible Realm experts in the world and all the superpowers. But when the opinions of the majority overwhelmed the minority, the ranking would take effect. And the ranking on the Divine List was also related to the division of interests of the superpowers in the Dark World. Li Tianlan now occupied a place on the Divine List. He replaced Aldak, who was killed by him, and ranked 9th on the Divine List. Wang Tianzong was still the 1st on the Divine List. But Arsis, who was ranked 2nd, became 3rd. The deity of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital replaced Arsis and became the 2nd master on the World Divine List. Gu Xingyun's ranking dropped 1 place to the 5th. The master of Samsara Palace now ranked 4th. Sitihongyue, the hidden god of Zhongzhou State, rushed from 15th to 11th on the Divine List. It was an interesting phenomenon. In Zhongzhou State, Siducangyue ranked higher than Li Tianlan, but on the Divine List, Li Tianlan ranked higher than Siducangyue. But it didn't matter anymore. Wang Tianzong thought of the list that would spread to every corner of the Dark World today, and his eyes were indifferent. The 15th Invincible Realm expert on the Divine List. Now there was a dead man. It was a name that needed to be remembered by the Dark World. But he had long forgotten about it. Because there was no point in remembering. What needed to be remembered was the past. Chapter 262. In September, although the temperature in Tiandu was still not low, accompanied by the sea breeze, it had become cool after nightfall. Heaven capital was Changdao. In less than a month after the final battle of Changdao, everyone seemed to have forgotten the name of Changdao. This place had become Tiandu, the Tiandu of the gods. On the newly printed map of East Island, Heaven capital replaced Changdao. In less than a month, the Purgatory of Heaven capital began to gradually control the special warfare system of East Island, and all the procedures were being handed over. After Shinichi Miyamoto's death, Mai Shiranui, the young palace master of Liuhua Palace, sought refuge with the Purgatory of Heaven capital. Now, she had become the palace master of Liuhua Palace. Their addition made it easier for deity to control the divine wind force. After suffering a crushing defeat in the currency war, East Island was as quiet as a pool of stagnant water. But in the eyes of the observant people, East Island was changing almost every moment. The extremely mysterious Purgatory of Heaven capital and the battered East Island. Under the disaster, the two were merging at an incredible speed and eventually became inseparable. Military Counselor felt like he was a witness to everything. He now lived in the temporary headquarters of the Purgatory of Heaven capital, guarding Li Tianlun. This place was too close to the mysterious god, so close that he could even hear every decision made by God and feel the subversive changes that those decisions brought to East Island. Military counselor did not leave Tiandu. For the time being, he didn't get the rest that he wanted. Instead, it was Saint who returned to Zhongzhou State first after finishing his own business. Saint had retreated from the peak of the half-step invincible realm to the peak of the thunder-shocking realm. While his foundation was getting more and more stable, it also meant that his combat capability was declining. In this way, the task of guarding Li Tianlun fell on military counselor. Military counselor had seen a lot these days. If there was no accident, even if the Samsara Palace continued to cooperate with the Purgatory of Heaven capital, this was probably the only chance for him to observe this force closely. The more the military counselor watched, the more solemn his heart became. God had done a lot of things these days. Military counselor could vaguely feel that some things were aimed at East Island. Although the Purgatory of Heaven capital now controlled the special warfare system of East Island, it could not use the people of East Island to do things against East Island. This was what made the military counselor shudder the most. Because from the beginning to the end, whether it was daybreak, dawn, or phoenix, the three of them had been staying here. God himself had never left. So where are the people who did those things? Now, it seemed that as time passed, the number of people God's hands could use seemed to increase, and it became easier to do things. Silently, military counselor could easily sense the huge power hidden in the darkness. Unknown to others, but successful in every endeavor. With the entire special warfare system of East Island as the bargaining chip. The Samsara Palace helped deity, but was the seemingly powerful Purgatory of Heaven capital really in line with the interests of the Samsara Palace? Looking at the tranquil night outside the window, the military counselor remained motionless. He was so depressed that he could barely breathe. "What are you thinking about?" A voice suddenly rang out beside the military advisor. It sounded gentle and warm. The military counselor had long been used to God appearing beside him without warning. He shook his head calmly. "Nothing." "Oh," God said. He was not wearing the black cloak, nor was he holding the ferocious death scythe. He stood there in casual clothes. The only feeling he gave people was that he was peaceful and real. "Today is the last day," deity suddenly said. The military counselor's expression suddenly froze. The last day. It had been more than half a month since the final battle of Changdao. Military counselor had never seen Li Tianlun, so he didn't know his specific situation. Li Tianlun stopped at the villa where military counselor was, but deity gave a strict order that no one was allowed to disturb him. Military counselor could only guard outside and could do nothing. Deity would come here almost every day, and the time he stayed gradually changed from 3 to 5 hours at the beginning to 1 or 2 hours, and then to dozens of minutes. Until now. This was the last day. Will Tianlun wake up? Military counselor was excited, and there was some awe in his eyes. Deity could save Li Tianlun. He knew this a long time ago. But Li Tianlun really had no signs of life at that time. If Li Tianlun could wake up today, it would be equivalent to resurrection. What kind of means was this? "Do you want him to wake up?" Deity asked with a strange expression. Military counselor was excited, but he was still not calm. He said seriously, "I just want him to recover." "If you want to recover completely, you can't wake up now. There is still one thing missing." Deity seemed to think of something, and there was a trace of coldness in his eyes. "What is it?" Military counselor took a deep breath and asked. "The flower," deity said blandly. "So after today, you have to take him away from here. That flower has bloomed. It's in Lin, Zhongzhou State, Qingyun Temple." Qingyun Temple, military counselor repeated it silently, and he looked a little surprised. "Great Master Wu Wei is there?" Deity turned his head and took a deep look at military counselor. His eyes seemed to be able to penetrate everything. Finally, he laughed softly. "Do you know that place? Judging from your tone, you seem to have been there." Military counselor. He shook his head. Most of the 12 supermasters of samsara have traces. Even the identity of saint is not a secret in my eyes now. But you, I have never heard of you. Or you. What about you? Military counselor's eyes were somewhat meaningful. Or you. Of course I am deity. Deity's tone was indifferent. Of course I am military counselor. Military counselor was equally indifferent. Deity said no more, turned upstairs, and walked into Li Tianlan's room. Military counselor waited silently outside, counting the time. Time passed quickly. This time, in less than 20 minutes, Deity had come out again. Go and find that flower. Deity looked at military counselor with a somewhat complicated look in his eyes. That flower. That indescribable flower. If he had that flower back then, how could he have no hope of reaching the real invincible realm in this life? Unfortunately, he didn't have it back then. So he could no longer move forward in this life. Deity's figure gradually disappeared, without any reluctance. Although he didn't get that flower back then, he got many years of time. That was the truth. Even if he didn't get enough, it was enough. Military counselor's figure rushed into Li Tianlan's room. The furnishings in the room were extremely empty, without any furniture at all. In the middle, there was a very high ice coffin. The ice coffin didn't look different, but it exuded a unique fragrance. Li Tianlan was lying in the ice coffin, shrouded by some looming white mist in the coffin. He was dressed in white, and his face was ruddy. The sword wound that penetrated his heart on his chest had disappeared. Scarlet divine punishment. The silver legend of Qin. The human emperor, which was broken in two, was placed in the ice coffin with him. Li Tianlan crossed his hands, holding an ancient bronze mirror in his hand. That was the national divine artifact of East Island, Yagami mirror. But at this time, cracks had appeared on the surface of the octagonal mirror one after another, as if the tangible fate had turned into wisps of white mist, wrapping Li Tianlan up. Military counselor hesitated for a long time, and finally reached out to touch the ice coffin in front of him. The ice coffin suddenly cracked, and all the mist in the coffin disappeared in an instant. The coffin turned into pieces of broken ice, fell to the ground, and disappeared in an instant. Li Tianlan's body fell, and military counselor hugged him. Military counselor looked at Li Tianlan in confusion, wondering what the hell was going on. Li Tianlan's face was ruddy and healthy. He still didn't breathe, but his heart began to beat constantly. There's a car outside to take you to the airport. The private plane has been arranged. Take his things and go. Deity's voice seemed to come to military counselor's ears from far away. Thank you. Military counselor suddenly came to his senses and thanked him. In any case, if Li Tianlan could really live, the whole samsara, the whole Li family, owed Deity a thank you. Deity was silent for a while, and then said blandly, "Tell your boss Qin that if the Battle of East Island is just the beginning and the small scene," she said, "then I look forward to the next cooperation." Military counselor packed up Li Tianlan's things and left with Li Tianlan. He didn't respond, and he couldn't respond. According to the plan, the plot of East Island was indeed just the beginning. But the problem was that more than half a month had passed since the final battle of Changdao. Li Tianlan hadn't woken up yet. Qin Weibai hadn't woken up yet, either. The limousine arranged by the Purgatory of Heaven capital in advance was getting farther and farther away in sight. Deity stood on the balcony of his villa, watching the car disappear and eventually become a small black. Zi, the prince of East Island in a purple palace dress, nestled in his arms obediently and gently, and looked at the small black dot in the distance like him. They're gone. The black dot in sight disappeared completely. Zi moved his body and whispered, exhaling. Deity said yes. Let's sleep. Ziya's voice became more and more delicate, and her body seemed to be a little soft. She was the most beautiful woman in the royal family. Now that she had turned from a girl to a woman, she exuded a very reserved and delicate charm. I can do it today, maybe, she blushed. Maybe I can succeed today, Deity smiled, picked up Ziyi, and strode to the bedroom. Ziyi obediently put her arms around his neck and bit Deity's ear. Do you like a boy or a girl? A boy, of course. Will he really become the crown prince of East Island in the future? The future will be. Yes. I've even thought about the baby's name. Just call him Huau. I've thought about it for a long time. Quote, Deity's first son was Huau. But Huau died. His second son was also going to be called Huau. He didn't get the flower back then, but he got many years. Whether the old monk had been partial or not. Deity finally got something. Black and white were about to change between heaven and earth. Military counselor took Li Tianlan through the darkest night and went up to Mount Qingyun. Great Master Wei was sitting in front of Qingyun Temple. He was looking at the flower. The fairyland that had once caused a lot of noise on the internet was no longer there. The white mist had completely disappeared, and all the flowers, plants, and trees on the mountain had withered. The spreading fate compressed the vitality of the mountain to the extreme, condensed Great Master Wu Wei's blood, and finally blossomed into a flower. There was only one flower. A flower that shone with all kinds of colors. Military counselors saw the delicate but vibrant flower from a distance, but he didn't see Great Master Wu Wei until he got closer. Great Master Wu Wei's bright kasaya had become strips of cloth hanging on his body, and blood had soaked the kasaya. His hair was white, and his face was wrinkled. In the dark, the master sat there motionless, like a statue without any sign of life. Military counselor was startled. He hesitated for a moment before asking respectfully, Great Master Wu Wei? The master raised his head. His eyes were dim, but there was a smile on the corner of his mouth. From the final battle of Changdao to tonight. This was the first time he had moved. Pick it off. His tone was soft, and he looked at the flower in front of him. Military counselor looked at the flower in front of the master. This was the flower that deity talked about. It had no leaves or stamens, only petals that shone with illusory colors. This flower, military counselor carefully picked it off, a little confused. It's not a flower. Great Master Wu Wei shook his head wearily. It's the dragon vein. Military counselor's palms shook, and he almost threw the flower to the ground. The real top big shots in Zhongzhou State all vaguely knew that the dragon vein of Zhongzhou State had completely disappeared nearly 2 decades ago. Military counselor also knew that. He never thought that this extraordinary flower turned out to be the so-called dragon vein. How much fate and vitality did this flower represent? Military counselor couldn't imagine it at all. The dragon vein is incomplete, but it's enough to save this young man. Great Master Wu Wei coughed and said in a hoarse voice, Is your boss all right? Military counselor hesitated. He knew that the master in front of him could be regarded as the boss's adoptive father, and the other party's state was not very good, so he told the truth. The boss was in a coma on the night of the final battle of Changdao, and he hasn't woken up yet. Great Master Wu Wei fell silent. Just when military counselor thought that the master had fallen asleep or even died, an old sigh sounded softly. Infatuated child. The most infatuated person was the most heartless. The most heartless. Across the night, Great Master Wu Wei looked into the distance, as if he could see thousands of miles at a glance. Tell her a message for me. Great Master Wu Wei whispered. Military counselor wondered why he was asked to pass the message all day. But he still nodded seriously. Master, please go ahead. You are not you, and he is not him. Why are you so persistent? Great Master Wu Wei said indifferently. Military counselor didn't understand, but he wrote it down carefully. He looked at the dragon vein in his hand and seemed to be in a dilemma. Let him eat it. Great Master Wu Wei whispered, then put him in the main hall. Military counselor said, He tore off the unimaginable fate with his trembling hands one by one and fed them to Li Tianlan. There were 9 petals in total. After putting them into Li Tianlan's mouth, military counselor looked at Great Master Wu Wei in front of him. Master, please. He reached out to the temple gate behind Great Master Wu Wei. Great Master Wu Wei shook his head, and his smile became more serene. I can't move. He said, You go. Military counselor was a little stunned. He wanted to say something but finally asked, Why can't I move? Because I have to wait for a while. Great Master Wu coughed and said, "Hurry up. Hurry up." Military Counselor did not dare to delay any longer. He held Li Tianlan and quickly walked into the main hall. There was also an ice coffin in the main hall. Military Counselor put Li Tianlan in the ice coffin. After thinking for a while, he walked out of the temple gate. Great Master Wu coughed harder. Seeing Military Counselor coming out, he just waved his hand and couldn't even say a word. "But, do you want to go to the hospital?" Military Counselor looked at the old monk in front of him with some worry. When he first walked into Qingyun Temple as a private person, he was lucky enough to meet Great Master Wu. At that time, he was not the Military Counselor of Samsara. But Great Master Wu gave him a lot of advice. He had never forgotten this friendship. "No need." Great Master Wu coughed for a while and calmed down again. "The next step is to wait." "Wait?" Military Counselor was a little confused, but before he had time to ask anything, the thick night was instantly filled with endless brightness. It was not light. It was fog. The vast white fog surged silently in the main hall of the temple gate. The white fog became thicker and thicker, enveloping everything in an instant. In Military Counselor's eyes, Great Master Wu was disappearing. His figure was completely shrouded in fog. They were less than 2 meters apart, but at this time, they couldn't see anything. The white fog gradually thickened. There were no flowers in front of Great Master Wu. But the roots of the flowers were still there. When they couldn't see it, the roots of the flowers began to disappear bit by bit and eventually returned to the earth. The whole Qingyun Temple seemed to be full of vitality all of a sudden. Colorful colors spread across the whole mountain at a speed visible to the naked eye. The white fog representing the vast fate rolled and swirled in the air, rushed up to the sky in an almost crazy manner, and once again poured into the main hall of the temple gate. White fog was everywhere in the main hall, covering the Buddha statue and extinguishing the blue lamps. There was a sound of breaking. The ancient ice coffin was breaking and dissipating little by little. When all the ice coffins disappeared completely. When Li Tianlan's body floated in the air and was about to fall. In the thick fog. Thousands of miles away, Qin Weibai and Li Tianlan opened their eyes at the same time. Outside the temple gate, flowers bloomed all over the mountain. Chapter 263. Military Counselor clearly heard the sound of flowers blooming. The sound was fragmented and dense. It took root, broke through the soil, sprouted and bloomed. With weak but irresistible vitality and joy, it spread to every corner of Mount Qingyun. The rich fragrance came to his face. The vast white mist rolled wildly between the mountains and rushed to the main hall behind the gate of the temple. The light of the morning dispelled the deep darkness. The sky gradually brightened. The white mist began to disappear. The dilapidated and desolate Mount Qingyun became prosperous again. In the seemingly eternal and fleeting time, flowers and trees occupied every corner of Mount Qingyun and crowded every road on Mount Qingyun. Unimaginable vitality spread out, and even the walls of Qingyun Temple were blooming with flowers. Military Counselor was among them. His sight was full of flowers, like a sea of flowers. It was Military Counselor's first time to see such a scene. This almost mythical scene, which violated the laws of nature, was all because of fate. It was a mysterious, indescribable, and yet, it was a fate that truly existed. The petals of the dragon vein resurrected Li Tianlan, and the roots revived Mount Qingyun. It was like a miracle. Military Counselor's heart was left with only awe. Great Master Wu's body was almost completely wrapped in flowers. His body and face were completely withered like a skeleton, but his weathered and dim eyes were still calm and gentle. He had already expected such a scene that seemed familiar to him. Many years ago, when he extracted the dragon vein of Zhongzhou State and resurrected another person, he seemed to have seen his end and destiny in the unseen world. At that time, he didn't give that person this flower, but he gave him many years. He was impartial. He had a clear conscience. What a dragon vein! Military Counselor's trembling voice sounded with excitement. What I see today is really incredible. Great Master is really a god. The white mist became thinner. The resurrected Mount Qingyun showed its true appearance. In the flowers, Great Master Wu smiled weakly and whispered, "Unfortunately, there is no stamen." "What is a stamen?" Military counselor asked. He had noticed the dragon vein just now. It had roots but no leaves. It had petals but no stamen. That flower was too strange. It gave military counselor the feeling that it was a broken flower, not complete. Of course, the dragon vein was not complete. Great Master Wei had personally drained the dragon vein of Zhongzhou State and had been trying to reunite it over the years. But there was a Taoist priest who was doing the same thing as him. But it didn't matter. "The stamen is the foundation," Great Master Wei replied faintly. Military counselor's heart trembled. He thought of Li Tianlan. He didn't know what happened to Li Tianlan's combat capability in Changdao, but he was not far from Li Tianlan at that time, so he could clearly feel what happened the moment Li Tianlan entered the invincible realm. In just a moment, Li Tianlan directly destroyed all his foundation in exchange for the craziest outbreak. A flower without foundation saves a person without foundation. There seemed to be some relief in Great Master Wu's eyes. He looked at the sea of flowers all over the mountain and whispered, "From now on, Tunlan is his own foundation and the foundation of the dragon vein of Zhongzhou State." Although the dragon vein he regathered was incomplete, it already had a foundation. It really didn't matter how much Xian Xuanzi had mastered. He had become the foundation that carried the destiny of a nation all by himself. He had the dragon vein. In this state, Li Tianlan's destiny was so prosperous that it could be said that it was rare for hundreds of years. Regathered the dragon vein. Reopened the golden age. Great Master Wu looked up at the sky. His vision became gray and blurred, but his smile became clearer. "The most perfect," he said in a low voice. The footsteps sounded inside the temple gate, soft, smooth, and unhurried. Military counselor looked back at once. The thick white mist enveloped the entire Qingyun temple. It was a vast expanse, and he couldn't see anything. Li Tianlan couldn't see him either. He didn't even know where he was at all, nor was he sure of his current state. His mind was full of the sword light that exploded in the air like a waterfall at the last moment of the final battle of Changdao, the white dress that said sorry to him, and the fragrance and warmth of Qin Weibai. After that, there was darkness. The silence was like eternal darkness. There was no thinking, no feeling, no body, not even life and death. There was only silence and darkness. Li Tianlan couldn't feel his existence at all. It could even be said that he had completely disappeared. Nothing existed in the whole world. What awakened his consciousness was the dripping sound of running water. The sound of running water gradually dispelled the silence. His blood began to flow again, and his heartbeat slowly recovered. But his consciousness was still immersed in the deepest darkness. Light began to appear. The vast white mist began to fill every corner of the darkness. The white mist was getting thicker and more dazzling. Li Tianlan finally opened his eyes. There was white mist in his consciousness, and there was still white mist in his sight. It was a vast expanse, and he couldn't see anything. He felt his own heartbeat and felt his own breathing. Everything was there. But at this moment, he wasn't sure if he was still alive. There was a flat expanse in the white mist. Li Tianlan walked quietly. He had spent several days and nights in the desperate and frightening darkness. The environment in front of him couldn't make his mood fluctuate at all. He instinctively wanted to get out of here. A large expanse of white mist kept surging as he walked. It seemed to pour into his body, but it also seemed to pass through his back. The journey seemed long and short at the same time. Li Tianlan walked along the way. The world was quiet. The white mist kept gathering and dispersing. In a trance, Li Tianlan seemed to see a door. The door was very narrow and closed at this time. Wrapped in the white mist, it seemed to have a very sacred feeling. Li Tianlan walked over in silence. He pushed the door in front of him. The vast mist receded like running water. Li Tianlan saw the sunshine and the sea of flowers. He also saw a black cloak standing in the sea of flowers, and the beggar, sitting on the ground, almost drowned by the flowers. Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows. The dense mist swirled around him, and the morning sunshine sprinkled down with a fragrant smell. The autumn wind blew through the sea of flowers all over the mountains and plains, raising his white clothes. Standing outside the dilapidated temple gate, Li Tianlan chuckled. "You are..." Military counselor also saw Li Tianlan walking out of the temple gate. His first reaction was not the surprise after witnessing a miracle, but a great astonishment that was hard to hide. He looked at Li Tianlan as if he had never seen him before. "Military counselor?" Li Tianlan said softly. His voice was as soft as the white mist surging behind him. It was very gentle, but it had the power to cover heaven and earth. He stood there, but his whole person seemed illusory and real at the same time. Military counselor was speechless for a while. He had seen Li Tianlan before. But now Li Tianlan was completely different from before. His face hadn't changed, his voice hadn't changed, and his clothes hadn't changed. But now he looked indescribably perfect. Yes, perfect. Military counselor had never seen such a perfect man. It was indescribable temperament and style. He stood there looking the same as before, but at this time, he gave people a feeling of being natural and just right. The most perfect. Military counselor looked at Li Tianlan and suddenly had a feeling of reluctance to look away. "Where's little Bai?" Li Tianlan continued to speak. Military counselor suddenly came to his senses, and there seemed to be some hesitation in his eyes. "The boss is already at the headquarters of Samsara Palace." Military counselor hesitated and whispered. That night, he saw Qin Weibai hand Li Tianlan over to Dawn and saw Qin Weibai turn around. He couldn't understand such a move, but he could feel her determination and sadness when she turned around. "This is Great Master Wei." He calmly changed the subject. This time, the mysterious deity in East Island and the Great Master saved you together. Li Tianlan's face finally changed a little, but his every move was still extremely charming and perfect. He walked quickly to Great Master Wei and seemed to be a little incredulous. "Great Master Wei? We meet again." Great Master Wei, who Li Tianlan thought was a beggar at first, raised his head. He wore a tattered cassock, and his eyes were quiet and dim. Li Tianlan's eyes were calm, but there was some sadness in them. For the first time, he couldn't connect the old man in front of him with the eminent monk he met for the first time. He didn't say thank you, but looked at Great Master Wei seriously and asked, "Why did you save me, Great Master?" "Destiny chose me." Great Master Wei whispered, "You can't escape." Li Tianlan didn't understand, so he could only remain silent. The light in Great Master Wu's eyes grew dimmer and dimmer, but it never went out. He looked at Li Tianlan and asked, "How do you feel now?" Li Tianlan moved his body casually. In an instant, with him as the center, there was a large tear in the air. Even military counselor had to step back for some distance. "I'm still in the invincible realm." Li Tianlan laughed at himself, and there was some unwillingness in his eyes. He shook his head and said, "It's good to survive." "It's okay." Great Master Wu's tone was flat and confident. For Li Tianlan, the current invincible realm was not a good thing, but the so-called hidden danger would eventually disappear. He could regather the dragon vein for Zhongzhou State and reopen a prosperous era for Zhongzhou State. When his life was coming to an end, the last thing he had to do was to accumulate power for the dragon vein. Li Tianlan's problem was not a problem, because now Li Tianlan was the dragon vein of Zhongzhou State. The stronger the dragon vein was, the stronger Zhongzhou State was, and the stronger Li Tianlan was. His way of accumulating power for the dragon vein was rough and obscure, but it was the most effective. It could be said that from the moment Li Tianlan opened his eyes, Xian Xuanzi, the extraordinary man of Taoism, had already lost. The overall situation of Zhongzhou State was settled. One was bright, and the other was dark. The dragon appeared mysteriously. Chapter 264. Great Master Wu's tone was calm and confident, but Li Tianlan's mood was not optimistic. In the final battle of Changdao, he had forcibly entered the invincible realm with the intention of self-destruction. He had no way out, and naturally he didn't think about the future. But now when he opened his eyes and saw the colorful world again, it was hard for Li Tianlan to describe his feelings. After the doubts of coming back from the dead, there was only mixed feelings in his heart. No one knew better than him how bad his current state was. Because he was now in the invincible realm. And seriously speaking, he was even stronger than when he was in East Island. But he couldn't make a move. If he made a move, he would die. In East Island, the moment he gave up all the foundation of martial arts, his realm had completely fallen below the 4 realms of martial arts. One could imagine how fragile his body was, which was not even in the chi-controlling realm. The reason why his body did not completely explode under the powerful force at that time was that the vitality stored in his body by the immortality potion provided him with endurance. Now, although he came back from the dead, the huge vitality was gone, but the power was still there. The power of the invincible realm, but the body was not in the chi-controlling realm. In such a situation, Li Tianlan could completely blow up his body if he stamped his feet a little hard, not to mention making a move. In such a bad situation, how could he be completely relieved by Great Master Wu Wei's words? But perhaps because he had died once, Li Tianlan knew more about the value of living, so his expression was still calm. Looking at Great Master Wu Wei, who seemed to be about to run out of oil, Li Tianlan carefully bent down and said calmly, "Thank you for saving my life, Great Master. Saving you is equivalent to saving Zhongzhou State. You shouldn't say thank you." Great Master Wu Wei smiled. The morning wind blew over and blew up his completely dry and lusterless white hair. The master sat in the vibrant flowers, but he looked like a piece of dead wood without any sign of life. Li Tianlan didn't understand the meaning of this sentence, so he simply kept silent. The majestic wind fluttered the corners of his clothes, and his white clothes fluttered. He stood calmly, but vaguely, he seemed to suppress the brilliance of the flowers all over the mountain. There seemed to be only this white robe left on Mount Qingyan, with a dazzling style and bearing, natural and flawless. "Do you know why you live?" Great Master Wu Wei said gently. Li Tianlan shook his head. Grandmaster pointed at the cluster of flowers in front of him. So, Li Tianlan sat down. His movements were very slow. Great Master Wu Wei's eyes had turned to military counselor. He smiled and said nothing. There were some things that he could not say even to military counselor, who could be said to be his own people, or even to Qin Weibai. Even if he already suspected that Qin Weibai seemed to know something. Military counselor nodded knowingly. He looked at Li Tianlan and said, "Your Highness, I'll wait for you at the foot of the mountain." "Sorry for the trouble." Li Tianlan nodded. It was not until military counselor's figure completely disappeared that he turned to look at Great Master Wu Wei and said seriously, "Great Master, please enlighten me. What is karmic luck?" Great Master Wu Wei was not ambiguous. He directly asked a very simple and profound question. Li Tianlan, who was still in a trance and couldn't think calmly from death to life, felt helpless. Karmic luck and destiny were really beyond his understanding. He didn't believe in metaphysics. He wanted to say that karmic luck was luck, but looking at the old monk in front of him who was on the verge of collapse, he shook his head. "I don't know." It was an extremely rare opportunity for a guru to talk about metaphysics. Moreover, this guru had saved his life. He didn't want to jest in front of the guru at all. The so-called karmic luck is actually vitality. The vitality of every grass and every tree, every mountain and every river, every person and every country. Great Master Wu Wei said calmly, "Everything has vitality. A country has vitality, which is called fate. When the fate of a country is about to run out, the country will die. People have vitality, which is called destiny. When the destiny is over, people will die. If we use another explanation for vitality, it is karmic luck." Li Tianlan didn't know whether his body was too fragile or something else. Sitting in front of Great Master Wu Wei, he felt a little drowsy. A smile flashed in Great Master Wu Wei's eyes, and he continued, "Mountains and flowers, like people and countries, all have vitality. When all kinds of vitality are integrated together, it will become a vein. People have a pulse, which is related to life and death. The karmic luck composed of the vitality of all living things also has a pulse, which is related to the rise and fall. It can be said to be a dragon vein, an earth vein, or anything else. But one thing is certain. Karmic luck is related to the prosperity of a country and a person, and this most important vein is related to the rise and fall of the whole karmic luck. You can choose not to believe it, but how can you not believe what you see around you? Li Tianlan didn't doubt it. He seemed to be a little more spirited and thoughtful. Dragon vein. He was no stranger to this word. In his suppressed memory, his grandfather Li Honghe seemed to have said something about dragon vein, but he couldn't remember it now. And you are alive because of this vitality, this karmic luck, and this dragon vein. Great Master Wei concluded, I regathered the dragon vein for Zhongzhou state and reopened the prosperous times. In metaphysics, there is a saying that the dragon shows its head but not its tail. In the past many years, the dragon vein has been chaotic and has not been obvious, because it lacks the dragon head. Until today, when I added the dragon vein of Zhongzhou state to you, everything was settled. Now you are the dragon vein of Zhongzhou state, and also the dragon head. Regathered the dragon vein. Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows and asked, that is to say, there was no dragon vein in Zhongzhou state many years ago? It was emptied by me. Great Master Wei said kindly, but Li Tianlan felt a piercing chill in an instant. For a moment, Li Tianlan instinctively didn't dare to ask him what he was going to do by emptying the dragon vein. About 20 years ago, the dragon vein was already decaying, but the karmic luck of Zhongzhou state was still there, so I emptied the dragon vein and regathered it to form a new dragon head and dragon tail. I wasn't born at that time, was I? Li Tianlan finally couldn't help interrupting the great master. So at that time, the dragon head was not you. You were still the dragon tail. Great Master Wei looked at Li Tianlan and suddenly said, do you remember when we met in the Dongqing clan? As I said, more than 20 years ago, someone changed your birth destiny. Li Tianlan froze in place and didn't speak for a long time. The dragon head and the dragon tail are originally interchangeable, and each grabs its own karmic luck. Until today, everything is almost settled. Great Master Wu Wei's tone became more and more indifferent. Almost? Li Tianlan asked in reply. Almost means that the variable is very small, but it still exists. Although the dragon vein regathered, it is not strong after all. It will take about 10 years. Great Master Wei looked at Li Tianlan meaningfully. His eyes were very scary. The head and the tail are not looking after each other, and naturally, they can't coexist. Li Tianlan's heart was a little cold. Also at the meeting in the Dongqing clan, he remembered another sentence that Great Master Wu Wei had said to him. This benefactor has gone against the general trend and forcibly defied heaven. I'm afraid that you will die young and miserably in 10 years at most. 10 years. Li Tianlan opened his mouth and wanted to say something, but Great Master Wu Wei closed his eyes. 2 lines of blood flowed down from his eyes, followed by the nose, ears, and mouth. Dark red blood flowed directly from the master's mouth. The master closed his eyes, but the corners of his mouth, which was bleeding, were gently raised, revealing a disdainful smile. Disdainful. This was the first time that Li Tianlan had seen this kind of emotion in him. It seemed to be contempt. Li Tianlan was suddenly shocked. Karmic luck backfire. I said what I shouldn't say, so it's natural. Great Master Wu Wei opened his eyes again. His eyes became empty and blank, but his tone was still gentle. What else do you want to know? Li Tianlan was a little hesitant, but he didn't dare to ask again. Why did you help me, Great Master? After hesitating for a long time, Li Tianlan finally asked the question he had just asked. I want to regather the dragon vein. It's my destiny. Great Master Wu Wei's answer was almost the same. Your destiny should be to regather the dragon vein, right? And my destiny. He remembered the 10-year prophecy that chilled his heart and said with a self-deprecating smile, my destiny seems to have been changed? Aren't you helping me on purpose? Impartiality. Great Master Wu Wei's tone grew calmer. But you're still partial after all. Li Tianlan looked at him seriously and said, "If he was the so-called dragon tail before, then now he became the dragon head, it must have something to do with Great Master Wei. If he became the dragon head, then who was the dragon tail that would die 10 years later? I gave him a chance." Great Master Wei said calmly, "I gave it for many years, but he failed. That's the general trend." "The general trend?" Li Tianlan asked in reply. "The general trend of the dark world, from a metaphysical point of view, fluctuates because of the amount of luck." More and more blood flowed from the corners of Great Master Wu Wei's mouth. He raised his hand to stop Li Tianlan from speaking and continued, "The final battle of East Island this time is the biggest turning point and also a beginning. Zhongzhou State was going to lose, but because of your existence, the situation was barely saved, so I could take the opportunity to make you the dragon vein of Zhongzhou State and make you break through." That is to say, Li Tianlan felt a little strange in his heart. That is to say, if I hadn't entered the invincible realm in East Island, you would lose the most important person, and naturally, you wouldn't be able to become the dragon head. 10 years later, you would definitely die. Great Master Wu Wei said abruptly. Li Tianlan had mixed feelings. He was as strong as the invincible realm in East Island, and his original intention was to save Qin Weibai, that was all. If Qin Weibai hadn't been kidnapped, he wouldn't be as strong as the invincible realm. Then the final winner of the final battle of Changdao, East Island? He seemed to understand something, but he was a little confused, so he said to himself, "East Island, of course." Great Master Wei said calmly, "In terms of luck, in recent years, East Island can be said to have the most prosperous luck, far surpassing Zhongzhou State and other countries. If not, why do you think the Pope of the Vatican attaches so much importance to the final battle of East Island? And why does he attach so much importance to you?" Li Tianlan smiled helplessly. His mind became clearer and clearer, but also more confused. He spread his hands and said, "Then East Island is now, today is different from the past." Great Master Wei smiled and said, "A real heavenly son of East Island died in this final battle, and most of his luck belongs to Zhongzhou State. If he hadn't died, you wouldn't have survived today." He looked at Li Tianlan with empty eyes. "Everything is interlinked, and the real battle is just a corner. How can it be possible for the dragon vein to gather in Zhongzhou State without more deaths?" At this moment, Li Tianlan had 1,000 words in his heart, but he couldn't say a word. After today, if you achieve something in the future, you might as well make this place your headquarters. Great Master Wei looked at the sky blankly, pointed to Mount Qingyun in front of him, and said softly. Li Tianlan was slightly shocked. He had a hunch, but he couldn't believe it was true. "Great Master," Li Tianlan's face changed a little. "I want to see this landscape." Great Master Wei looked in the direction of the West Lake and said softly, "I'll carry you." Li Tianlan said without hesitation. Great Master Wei laughed. He nodded and said softly, "Okay." Li Tianlan carefully carried the Great Master on his back and went down the mountain. Step by step, he kept his feet on the ground. Great Master Wei leaned on Li Tianlan's back and said softly, "Your current ranking on the divine list is roughly equal to the ranking of Zhongzhou State's luck in the world before the final battle of Changdao. Don't worry. Although I can't do much, I can help you in the end." "Why do you do this, Great Master?" Li Tianlan's heart trembled slightly. "I can live," Great Master Wei said with a smile, "but you can't." He looked ahead and said softly, "Watch the landscape." Li Tianlan wanted to persuade him, but Great Master Wei patted him on the shoulder hard and motioned him not to say more. Li Tianlan, who was in a trance and had mixed feelings, silently carried Great Master Wu Wei and went down the mountain step by step. He carried him. Walking down his mountain was also his mountain. In the bright morning, there was a hint of lethargy on Mount Qingyun. Li Tianlan came to the water's edge with Great Master Wu Wei on his back. The sun shone down, and the water rippled and sparkled. "How many steps?" Great Master Wu Wei suddenly asked with a smile. Li Tianlan froze and didn't speak for a while. 2,000 steps. Great Master Wu Wei pinched Li Tianlan's shoulder and kept exerting force. His voice began to pant, and he said with a low laugh, Today, you carry me for 2,000 steps, and I will reopen a prosperous land for Zhongzhou State and the Li family for 2,000 years. After that, it will be left to future generations. Li Donlan didn't think this sentence was so shocking, but he felt a little disappointed. He slowly put Great Master Wu down and faced the West Lake in front of him. The master sat among the flowers and plants and reached out as if he wanted to touch the waves that were neither far nor close. His low murmur came from the wind. It was soft and gentle, but it instantly echoed throughout Mount Qingyun. When the dragon is about to raise its head, remove its armor when it sees the dragon. The voice was dissipating. The master's body also began to dissipate. The cold wind blew over. Starting from the palm, the master's body was blown into pieces piece by piece. The pieces turned into dust and flew with the wind. The cold wind blew over. The vast white mist surrounding Qingyun Temple surged into the air in an instant. The vast white mist enveloped Mount Qingyun again, and eventually the whole lonely mountain. A large amount of fate and vitality seeped calmly and gently into every corner of the mountain. The wind gradually disappeared. The mist gradually disappeared. Li Donlan stood calmly where he was. The sun shone down. The mysterious Qingyun Temple. The beautiful lonely mountain. All the man-made buildings disappeared completely with the wind. The well-proportioned pavilions, the lonely monasteries, the solemn golden body of the Buddha, disappeared. Completely disappeared. The whole lonely mountain seemed to go back countless years in an instant, becoming the most primitive and prosperous scenery. Great Master Wu's body completely disappeared from the world with the wind. There was only the Green Mountain in front of Li Tianlan. How charming the Green Mountain was! His eyes were blank and sad. He stood where he was for a long time without moving. The morning sun gradually turned into a scorching sun and rose high into the sky. A storm suddenly rose on West Lake. A violent, almost suffocating momentum suddenly swept a large area of the lake. Waves rolled on the calm lake. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.